Good evening, everybody. We will call to order this special meeting of council. First up, I will ask the clerk if we have a quorum.
Yes, Mayor Patterson, we have quorum.
Okay, so first we will look to approve the addits. We just have a communication that's been received for the addits, please. Moved by Councillor Kiley, seconded by Councillor Doherty. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Are there any disclosures of potential pecuniary interest? Councillor Bone.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, I, Ryan Bowman, the Council of the Corporation of the City of Kingston, declare my pecuniary interest in the matter of Clause 1 and 4, Report Number 1B. As an employee Utilities Kingston, it may be perceived that I have a conflict insofar as it relates to Report 1B, Clauses 1 and 4. Insofar as they relate to Utilities Kingston, I ask that they be separated so that I may vote on the remaining balance. Thank you.
That's great, thank you. Are there any other disclosures of pecuniary interest? Okay, seeing none, we will move on. We have no delegations this evening, so we will move to our reports. First, we have report number 84 from the CAO.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson and members of council. So we do have a presentation for you tonight. We're happy to be here to give you some information in regards to our business park, more specifically in the rural area, and associated servicing. So with me tonight, there are a few people that will be joining me to support this presentation. We have Laura Blanes from Stiletto Consulting, who has been retained to lead the integrated economic development strategy. We also have Peter Eugenboss, Commissioner of Business, Environment and Projects, Andrea Gummo, Manager of Policy Planning, and Jim Keach, President CEO of Utilities Kingston. Could we go to the next slide, please? So council will recall that in the council strategic priority, we have priority to explore the feasibility of rural business parks and associated services. So this report does address in part this priority. And I say in part because there will still be work to do that will be incorporated in the integrated economic development strategy. So I want to make sure council understand that this is not the end of the rural economic development. This is only really the beginning, but we need to move forward with some of these recommendations to be able to build a foundation. So this report does support that the city continues to work and establish rural clusters, and that these businesses be businesses that can operate on private water and sewer services. This report also recommends that we continue to prioritize our city-owned business parks within our urban boundary that include Cataraqui Estate, St. Lawrence Business Park, Future Clogs Road, and also the airport lands, which have been identified for future business use for businesses that have limited servicing requirement. The report also speaks to prioritizing the St. Lawrence Business Park as a future area of expansion when we actually move forward with our next official plan update. And finally, the report does recommend that we continue to work with Queen's University to move forward with the future development of Innovation Park for employment uses. So I wanted to give that some context and some understanding of what the report is really about, and to reassure council that we haven't completed our work with the rural business park, and this is the beginning, but this is an important conversation to have with council. Next slide, please. So with that, I will turn it over to Laura Blanes, who will give us some updates in terms of some of the data that have been collected for rural Kingston.
Great. Thank you so much, Lanny, your worship, and councillors. It's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. So we're just going to run you through a few data points so you have context for the rural area and some of the information that we've gathered as part of the rural economic strategy that Lanny and the team are using as part of this exercise. Next slide. So as we look at the boundaries of rural Kingston, it's really fascinating in terms of where the boundaries exist. And we did this as a starting point so that we could do the assessment of where some of the opportunities may be and being able to understand business counts, workforce, and population. And so we do have 2 completely rural census tracts, as well as a portion of 3 census tracts that are a mix of urban and rural. And you'll see more detail on this when you see the full rural economic strategy. The census tracts are the most granular geographic area available for statistical analysis. It is important to note that the estimated population is about 19,000, or approximately 15% of the city's population is spread across 83% of the city's land area. So certainly concentrated. Next slide, please. This is the map that just shows the boundaries and what we've noted just a moment ago around how 2 of the tracts, as you'll see, 02 and 00 that are fully rural, and then the other tracts that sort of also lie on urban boundaries. Next slide. When you look at the population, 84% of Kingston's population lives in an area with a population density of more than 1,300 people per square kilometer. The rural population is spread across an area with a density of only about 51 people per square kilometer, with an average for the city of 274 people per square kilometer. So certainly an opportunity to increase population density in the rural area. Next slide. A few demographic highlights from a population base in the fully rural part of Kingston. It has declined moderately in recent years, but in rural areas adjacent to the urban core, population has risen quite considerably. The age of fully rural parts of Kingston had a median age of 49.5 compared to 41.3 in the urban core. So a little bit of an older demographic in rural Kingston is what we've been finding. The income, however, is higher. So rural Kingston has a higher income level than in the urban centers. In the housing area, on average, the value of dwellings is higher in rural Kingston. We're assuming some may be retirees and investing in larger plots of land in the urban area, in the rural areas. From an education perspective, more than 94% of the 25 to 64 population in rural Kingston have at least one high school education. Nearly 32% have a university degree. That would be fairly consistent with national standards and average. And 11% have a master's degree or higher. Self-employment is considerably high in rural Kingston, mainly due to the large farming sector. Self-employment rate in rural Kingston is certainly much higher as a result of this. Next slide. If you look at the self-employment in Kingston, and we're looking here at rural versus the urban Kingston, it's 8.4 in urban Kingston, 9.3 in Kingston as a whole. And if you look at the truly rural census tracts, 00 and 02 that we highlighted, it's 16.2 in 02, which is the north section, and in the east section, it's 18.6. So considerably higher. And again, you'll see a breakdown of that with the farms and the other areas that you'll see in the full economic strategy. Next slide. For industry and commercial breakdown, a few highlights that we'll summarize. As of June 20th, there's 148 farms operating in the city of Kingston. It is important to note that only 20% of the farms have more than one employee other than its owners, and 36% of farms are beef or dairy cattle farming. Next slide. In addition to farming, there's another approximately 380 firms in rural Kingston. The largest sector is construction at 91 businesses, followed by retail trade with 50, professional services with 41, and personal services with 40. More than 300 of these firms are fully rural in the fully rural area of the city, i.e. those 2 census tracts that are full rural. Next slide. This just shows you a breakdown of what I've just shared with you as a quick snapshot with 91 businesses in construction, and then you'll see retail, trade, etc. You do see the agriculture is farther down, and that's because it's 19 that are actually officially registered businesses with more than one employee than the owner. Whereas there's still an additional 128 farms that are actually not, that are self-employed and therefore not showing up in this assessment. And that concludes the summary of the data points that we wanted to share with you as part of this exercise. Next slide. I believe it's over to Pete.
It is. Thank you, Laura, and nice to see everybody at council. I'm next. I'm going to ask for the next slide, please. And I'm going to switch gears into the urban boundary. Just a brief review of the city's business park. So here, St. Lawrence Business Park. There have been quite a number of sales over the last 4 or 5 years. And also the city did recently reacquire about the same number of acres, about 33 acres in new inventory on a repurchase from the Tim Hortons distribution center. You see that at the center of your screen. Just to the north there is what CAO Hurdle was speaking about. One of the recommendations tonight is to prioritize expanding the St. Lawrence Business Park by moving the urban boundary just north of the existing business park where we do have servicing, and it would extend into that 60-acre parcel that the city does own. Next slide, please. Here is the other large city business park. This is Cataract Way Estates Business Park, and over the last 4 or 5 years has seen almost 90 acres of land sold, and there are more lots under development potential right now. Highlighted, of course, with Frulac and Canada Royal Milk, but a number of other smaller, important businesses, local companies who have invested in expanding here in Kingston. So this park is nearly sold out with just a handful of properties left. If we move to the next slide, we will be seeing the Clogs Road area off of Creekford and Gardeners Road. And these are 2 parcels the city acquired for future business park growth. These lands are in the urban boundary right at the Gardeners Road and 401 interchange. Council has approved in capital budgets the costs to do the planning approvals. So right now we're in a draft plan approval stage for these lands, and we're seeing a potential to develop them over 2 phases over a number of years, and yielding 85 acres of serviced development land. The phase 1 would still be 3 to 5 years away from being on the market, ready to go for employment use. Next slide, please. And also CAO Hurdle mentioned the airport. The airport does have opportunities for employment lands, and as per a land use study that was brought forward and approved by council just a couple of years ago, the focus right now in phase 1 of a very long-term plan, about phase 1 over the next 10 years, is to focus on aviation-related business and aviation support type businesses at the airport. And the key thing here is to use existing services and not to bring in new water and sewer or undertake costly expansions of downstream water and sewer infrastructure to allow for increased capacity and development at the airport. These are costly improvements, and there are existing lands, particularly in parcel 1 and parcel 2, that are around the that are airside and near the terminal building that have access to water and sewer that can support limited businesses with limited water and sewer needs. So hangars and airplane maintenance services, that sort of thing, that were identified in the land use strategy. I also wanted to highlight parcel 5, which is the northern parcel, and there is opportunity for a general aviation development such as hangars and T-hangars that don't require water and sewer, which are costly to bring in off Bayers Drive and would require downstream improvements as well, because the sizing of pipes in this area have been sized for historic airport uses, which goes back a number of decades. So what we're asking council tonight is to reaffirm that those are the strategies for the foreseeable future for the airport, and to not expand capacity into the airport for water and sewer. And my final slide next is actually, I think, somewhat redundant. So we've already talked about these things. So I will let things move on. Thank you very much. I think we have Andrea Gummo next. Yeah.
Yes, thanks, Peter. Thank you, and through you, your worship, I'm going to give you a very high-level summary of the planning policies that are in play here. Next slide, please. Always happy to go into more detail with questions. So this year, the provincial government did update the provincial policy statement. Through that update, as we brought a report to planning committee about that earlier, but through that update, essentially, a lot of the direction that had previously been given was reconfirmed. So the province is continuing to direct that infrastructure must be financially viable over its life cycle. And this is really because in the past, this work wasn't done. So now municipalities are required to ensure that not just the short-term costs of an infrastructure upgrade are covered, but also those long-term replacement costs. Also, any planning for infrastructure for municipality needs to be based on current and projected needs for that service. So it needs to be essentially justified with data. And this is especially important in order to ensure efficient land use patterns and in that way address climate change. Through all of the research we've been doing through density by design, we've been seeing that it seems that one of the strongest influences a municipality can have on climate change is ensuring efficient land use patterns, because that cuts down on transportation and carbon emissions associated with it. The provincial policy statement continued to discourage the use of what they call partial services. In the case of Kingston, this would mean municipal water only without the associated sewage treatment supports. Now in the new PPS, this has actually been downgraded to the least preferred servicing option. So the PPS gives a hierarchy of services where the most preferred is full municipal water and sewer. And in the past, partial had been next, but now they're actually looking at encouraging communal systems over partial services. And part of the reason for that is because we do see partial services in various municipalities across Ontario, but it's usually in cases where water has been brought in to deal with contamination. So it's usually not a planned situation. We have a couple of areas in the city where we do have water in an area that wouldn't normally be there, but it was brought in for specific health and safety reasons. And in fact, today, that's the only way that you can extend water pipes into a rural area is only to address contamination. Next slide, please. So of course, any discussion of urban and rural in the city leads us to discussing a little bit our urban boundary and the provincial direction for settlement areas. So the urban boundary of the city is the built up area, and predominantly that's based on fully serviced locations. The majority of our growth is directed to this location with a small amount to be directed to the rural area as well. The idea here is that we're really increasing density of the existing development through infill and intensification. And part of the reason why that is a strong priority for the city of Kingston, and in line with provincial direction, you need to use the land that's already available within a settlement area before expanding outwards. And that's really tied to the need to optimize those existing services and make efficient use of land based on the need that an individual municipality has. And this year in the PPS, we actually have seen a new option for adjustments to urban boundaries. So previously, any expansion to an urban boundary required what's called a full comprehensive review, which is essentially a very large undertaking with a lot of involvement of the province that essentially needs to show with data and population projections that the need for land is justified. Just this year, for the first time ever, we've seen another option to adjust urban boundaries that is called I would call it an adjustment. Essentially, you can't have any net gain in lands, but you can swap out some land and adjust the boundaries that way, as long as there is no net gain. And next slide, please. And this just shows you exactly where the urban boundary is in the city. So it's the red line that you can see there, and Westbrook is a little bit of an island just outside. Thank you. Now I think I'll turn it over to Mr. Keach.
So if I could go to the next slide, please. And so in talking about servicing, I'm going to focus on the water and sewer. And I think I'll make probably all my comments on this slide. The only other slide I have looks at the dollar value. So I said we are talking about water and sewer servicing, and we're talking about 3 specific areas. So obviously not the whole rural area. And the areas are the McAdoo's Lane Loop, Perth Road, and Sydenham Road, both up to Unity Road. You can do either of these 3 independently, or you could do all 3 together, although the Perth Road and the McAdoo's Lane Road do together. They are expensive to service without question. Our high level, and these are very high level estimates of capital costs, is in the $160 million range for both water and sewer, with McAdoo's Lane and the Perth Road one both in the $50 million range, and then the Sydenham Road one about $60 million. What these are looking at is the linear assets and also some facilities, and facilities can be pumping stations, reservoirs, storage, etc. And again, I just need to reiterate that I wouldn't even call these engineering estimates. They're very high level, looking at the distance, the facilities, the topography, and some environmental concerns that we may deal with along the way. In addition to the capital expenditures, there would also obviously be an increase in the operating expenditure. Our annual budget for water and sewer combined is in the neighborhood of $30 million, and we think it would add about $6 to $9 million to our operating expenses for the 2. And I'd have to say we would have some concerns from an operating perspective with these expansions, because you've got an extensive amount of infrastructure, particularly lengthwise, with a relatively low number of customers. And you can end up with water quality issues and also some flow issues in the sewers as well. So something that would have to be taken into account. And the other comment, looking at the capital expenditures, it would be how do you finance it? Do you look at rates, local improvements, those types of things? So a number of policy issues that also would have to be dealt with. And if we can go to the next slide, it just gives a very quick summary of the expenses that I already talked about. And they're my comments. Thank you very much.
So, Mr. Mayor, we'll be happy to take any questions that members of council may have at this point.
Okay, thank you very much for that joint presentation. Perhaps what I would ask of council is if you have a question, try to direct it to the presenter that you think is best placed to respond to it. But at the same time, for the presenters, if you want to jump in or feel that you have a better answer, that's fine too, just to kind of help organize the flow here. Okay, are there any questions from council? It's funny because initially I'm like, no questions. And then I saw like 6 hands all at once. Okay, so first I saw Councillor Hutchison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure I won that race, but I just got a couple of questions about just in the first presenter. I can't quite remember the name, but basically I'm concerned in general about expanding of services and our business parks in terms of urban sprawl. So it was interesting to see that population adjacent to the urban area is expanding or increasing while the rest of the rural area is decreasing. And also that education is on a household basis is higher in the rural area, which is very different than say 40, 50 years ago or even less. So I'm just wondering if these are signs of sprawl. and sprawl that we as a city are not controlling?
I'm not sure who would be best placed to answer that question.
Oh, whoever. I'm open.
I'm sorry, let me just see who.
Glenn is
Yeah, go
the
ahead.
presenter that presented that information, whether she wants to reply or not. So
Okay, I see CEO Hurdle has her hand up, so maybe we'll go there first.
Thank you. And Director Desjardins may want to add to this as well. So a couple of things. First of all, Councillor Hutchison, I want to reassure you that the staff recommendations are not to expand city-owned business parks, service parks in the rural area. The only section of business park that we're suggesting should be looked at the next official plan amendment would be the property that we own just north, literally, of the St. Lawrence Business Park. As far as the migration out of the urban core into the rural, I think, and I'm not sure, this is where maybe Mr. Desjardins can clarify this, but I think that would include areas that have been growing, for example, in South Frontenac, where you're seeing more single family home type development that we still have some in the city, but we have more intensification that's happening in the city. And if you look at other areas such as Loyalist Township, for example, you look at areas like Amhersview that has, again, a lot of single family home development. That's where you're definitely seeing some growth in the surrounding rural areas. I don't know if Mr. Desjardins would like to add to that.
Thank you, CEO Hurdle. Just through you to the councillor. I think what we're seeing here is the changing nature of rural. This is not about sprawl. This is really about the rural is changing. We're seeing people not just in rural Kingston, but throughout rural Eastern Ontario. This is a desirable lifestyle. And that's, I think, why you're seeing higher education, higher income into those areas.
Councillor Hutchison, you're still on mute, so just need you to unmute.
I forgot the clerk did that. Sorry. In some committees, it doesn't work like that. Yeah, so no offense, but I'm not sure what Mr. Desjardins said was any different than what I said, just different words. I asked that question in order to offer context, okay, to what's happening in general, and whether we're, whether we're actually controlling urban sprawl. The reason being that individual houses built out along highways and roads usually can lead to, and has done in other places, to demands for more services. And then the municipality starts to build out to those developments. So that's what I'm concerned about. And given, especially in the context of the report we received on broadband just a week or so ago, as much as I'd like to see broadband service to rural areas, that seems to me is just another service that we're going to build out to, and is a form of supporting urban sprawl. And I bring that up more as a question than a conclusion. I think it's something we need to think about. So my other question was to Andrea Gummo, and she said the province is now favoring communal service solutions. And I would like an example, something a little more detail of what that looks like, please.
Ms. Gummo?
Certainly. Thank you, through you, Your Worship. Mr. Keach may want to provide more detail on this potentially, but we do have a communal system in the city for the Canna subdivision. So that is something that exists in this area. There's also one just a little bit further east in another municipality. So in Ontario, they're a little bit rare. But my understanding is that in other provinces, they can be very common. So I've heard that actually in Alberta, it's quite common to develop on the basis of a communal system. Actually, another interesting anecdote, there was one put in Prince Edward County a few years ago to service a sort of a timeshare condo type development.
Thank you. We'll have another chance to come back to staff, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, what we'll do is we'll do a first round of questions. And if there are additional questions that come up, then I'll do a second round. That's fine.
Okay, so I'll let someone else go ahead.
Okay, the next hand that I saw was Councillor Kylie.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson, through you. My questions are similar, but I'll make them different enough to be worthwhile to Ms. Gummo. Ms. Gummo, you mentioned about efficient land use as one of the new PPS requirements. Could you explain that to us a bit further?
Sure. And apologies if I wasn't clear enough on that, because it's not a new direction. It actually builds on direction that's been in place since 1997. So the PPS, basically, since it was created, has been encouraging municipalities to develop in ways that involve efficient land use patterns. And basically what that means is the opposite of what most people's idea of sprawl is. So it's about making sure that, for every foot of pipe, there's enough users to sustain it. And when we develop in ways that are more efficient, it cuts down on the need for a lot of transportation because everything's closer together. And there are a number of benefits of developing in that way, in which sort of the PPS and our overall local planning framework in the official plan really encourages it from a bunch of different standpoints.
And is that why in the past, when we've looked to expand the urban boundary, the ministry has said no, that it wouldn't represent efficient land use?
That's right. So that would be a combination of basically having too much available land and not having enough justified sort of growth forecast to include additional land.
Actually, I'm glad you brought up the additional land. Is there a number, like a number of hectares that a city our size would need to be in that sweet spot? For example, if we do vote to expand it tonight, will they say no again? Because we still have a bunch of additional land within the urban boundary?
That's a great question. I think it's a little more complicated than that, just because it does involve going into a lot of detail about the type of expected growth. And for employment uses, like industrial uses and that kind of thing, they do tend to use more land. So the justification for how much employment land you use is usually very different from how you would justify how much residential land you need. Does that help, or is there any follow-up to that? Or maybe
it does. I saw another staff had his hand up as well.
Yes.
I think CEO Hurdle has her hand up.
Sorry, thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So we would, can you hear me? Okay, sorry, my computer was acting up. We would have to complete, as Ms. Gummo indicated, we would have to complete some studies that would demonstrate that we don't have sufficient land for, if it's residential, it would have to be based on our population projection and our housing projection based on that population growth. And looking at the land that we have left available and how much essentially housing can that land accommodate. If it's employment based, then what we have to do is look at our employment projection and looking at the amount of land that we need for that and how much land do we have left within the city boundary to service that. One thing that I do want to caution council that about in terms of these studies is that the ministry usually strictly looks at the amount of land. It doesn't look at whether or not the land is properly located or if the owner has any interest in developing this land anytime in the next 10 to 20 years. So one of the things we've struggled with in the past is that we have a lot of employment land that may not be properly located anymore. An example of that would be 700 Gardeners Road. Maybe 40, 50 years ago, it was a great location for employment land. Today, surrounded by residential and commercial wasn't necessarily the best location. And there are some other lands where the property owners are not necessarily interested in moving ahead with development. So those are the things that are not taken into consideration into the studies and what the ministry looks at, but there are things that from a city staff perspective, we're always considering.
Just one more really quickly, Mayor Patterson, through you. In thinking through how the ministry thinks about the land itself, Ms. Gummo, again, if you would, could you explain, you mentioned that there should be no net gain in land. That is something I need clarification on.
Certainly, thank you, and through you. Previously, the only way that you could ever adjust your urban boundary or your settlement area boundary was when you went through a full comprehensive review. So basically a full like analysis of the whole thing. And that is laid out in like a little section of the PPS. And then in the new PPS this year, they added sort of an addendum onto that says, you know, that's how it works for expansions or for new settlement areas. But if you want to make a minor adjustment, like take out some lands that you know don't make sense and add in the same amount, as long as there's no net gain, you can do that. And that is a practice that in my previous experience when I worked for municipal affairs and housing, we had started doing that in the East, in Eastern Ontario, because it made sense sometimes. And it kind of worked its way into the PPS. But it actually tends to be used more in the less in the GTA. In the GTA, things are a little more complicated, but in some of the smaller municipalities, sometimes it's just really easy to justify that, you know, we should adjust this boundary.
Okay, and follow up to that directly related to what you said about swapping some out, and I think that builds on what CIO Hurdle said. Are we proposing to swap out 60 acres if we're asking to take 60 more from beyond the urban boundary tonight?
So that is certainly what the ministry would be looking for. And we haven't had any discussions about what lands we might look at for an exercise like that. We would still need to do all of that analysis.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next is Councillor Neal.
Thank you very much. Just a couple of quick questions, if I can. I'm curious about, and I'll ask them both so that they can be answered at the same time. I'm curious about the rural business area. I know that it's been a long time tradition within the rural area that often there's a residence, usually an owner, on the property that is a business site. Is there any allowance for that happening, or would this be purely, as our urban employment lands would be purely just employment lands? And the other question I had was concerning, and I think I heard the answer from Ms. Gummo on this, but concerning the urban expansion areas, would they lend themselves at all to a request to transfer the lands to residential, which I wouldn't be supporting, but I'm curious what the process would be if somebody wants to, if the urban boundary is for the business area, employment lands only.
Thank you, Ms. Mayor, and through you. So maybe I'll address the second one first, Councillor Neal. So what we're looking at here is one parcel that the city owns, that the city acquired for employment land use. So that's directly north of the existing St. Lawrence Business Park. And as CAO Hurdle said, and as Ms. Gummo said, there will need to be studies done as part of prioritizing this as a potential expansion of the 60 acres to the business park, but it would be for business park purposes, not residential. The city owns it. the city needs to fund that work, and the city would be developing it with roads and services, just like our other business parks, through the Planning Act processes that will be required. So the city's in full control, other than the fact it's not in the boundary now. So we have to do that work to work with the province. I think maybe Laura or Craig might be able to address your question about rural businesses and ownership, but the rural study is taking surveys and looking at what the needs are for the area, and looking at what are the possibilities to assist the marketplace on what types of businesses and what are the needs for rural businesses. And you brought up a good point. Many are owned and operated by someone who may actually live on that site. So are the planning policies there? Would there be needs to change, or are there appropriate clusters for that type of scenario to work? So that would be part of the feedback and the surveys and what's needed for the rural area. If anyone else wants to add to that, I'd be happy to turn over the floor.
Let's go.
Oh, apologies. Could I just add?
Go ahead.
Thank you. So just to the second question that Commissioner Hugenboss answered first, we actually have pretty good information in terms of the city's land needs, and that's because of the official plan update that Greg Newman did when he was here. So we know that we have lots of residential lands available in the city, and we know that it does look like we're a little bit short on employment. Now, at the time of that official plan update, the ministry was very strong on urban boundaries, as they have been for a long time. And this new flexibility had not yet been built into the PPS. So I think part of the timing around this right now is it's a little bit of a continuation of that official plan amendment that we did a few years ago. But we need to update some of our information still, basically taking that work that Greg Newman did and kind of updating it based on what's happened in the intervening years. And so then we will know more detail about what our land needs are. Thanks.
Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, would you like me to Pete's point? It's Laura. Would you like
absolutely.
me?
Absolutely, Laura, go right ahead.
Sure. So just to add to that, Councillor Neal, on some of the things that we've looked at in the rural economic strategy that the team will see when the full report comes out is the assessment of potential opportunities for clusters of development that could potentially occur. And there was a fairly significant assessment in partnership with the GIS team within the city to look at where are there concentrated plots of land. Initially, we looked at greater than 50 acres of contiguous land. We also then looked at 100 acres because there's a lot. You have a lot of land in rural Kingston, and it's not necessarily owned by the city, but rather there would be individual private owners, multiple private owners that would make up those different land masses. And so that is being considered. So I just wanted to highlight that. And the second, around usage, there are some things that we're looking at in terms of cluster activities or potential uses to support what is identified in the plan of the city for hamlet-led development, and trying to align and mirror those activities around those potential areas for development. And that will also be included and highlighted, both from a potential use perspective and what the layout of those potential land options may be. I don't know if Mr. Desjardins wants to add anything further.
Your worship, through you to the councillors, I would only add that home-based businesses are certainly a phenomenon across the community, but very, very common in rural communities. And as Laura has mentioned, that the focus on hamlets and things like co-working spaces, rural co-working spaces, are things we're looking at that would allow for office access, hopefully high-speed internet into those locations to support some of the growing sectors. One of the sort of the second and third are professional services and technical services, administrative and support businesses that are certainly growing in rural communities.
Thank you. That answered both my questions.
Good. Next is Councillor Osterhoff.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Patterson, and to everyone for Laura and everyone's presentations. And I have had the opportunity to work with Laura through economic development as well, and it's a co-strategic a study for economic development. So it is really good to see the economic development part of it that has a say, not a say, but is also working with this. So I'm glad to hear Laura say that there's more to come, and that's really important to me. Obviously, I don't know where I'm going to start. I don't want to go on. I have questions for sure. I have two questions just came in from constituents right now, but I do want to say that I'm encouraged with our CAO saying that this is the beginning, because I don't think we're going to solve it all tonight, because there's a lot on the table here, and I have obviously with the mayor and the CAO and they know that I have a lot of ideas here and a lot of but we're looking for more input from the rural area as well. So the one question I have, maybe it relates a little bit to what we've just gone through in the latest development to go ahead with the spa. Someone is asking about the terminology of rural hubs, and is that something that is going to affect us more often, and will there be more studies? I guess, Andrea, will the rural area have an adequate number of studies to help look, because right now we don't designate lands, right? We like we do in the urban areas, and so that's my first question. When we look at an overview of the rural area, like we did early on tonight, and where more suitable development can occur, is our studies going to happen?
Skimo?
Thank you, through you, your worship. That type of apologies, I'm just starting my video here. Yes, so you're quite right, Councillor. We don't tend to sort of pre-designate those areas because they do require a lot of study. So the establishment of a dedicated cluster or hub of activities would certainly require quite a few studies to justify that land use change, including looking at water, any natural resources in the area, making sure that those are protected. And the high level framework for all of that is contained in the provincial policy statement and reflected in our official plan.
CEO Hurdle.
Yeah.
Thank you, and through Mr. Mayor. So just to maybe add to that, the beginning of this work will be incorporated in the integrated economic development strategy. So when we talk about clusters, yes, that's correct, that there will need to be a bit more studies that will need to get done. But in terms of looking at areas where it would make sense to have those clusters, as well as the type of businesses that would also fit well within those clusters, that's going to be part of the work that is going to be completed through the integrated economic development strategy, and part of the work that Mr. Desjardins and Stiletto is currently involved with. And Councillor Oosterhoff, you're probably aware of this, but there will also be a meeting next week, the Rural Advisory Committee, where this topic will be discussed as well.
Yeah, thank you for that, CEO Hurdle. I really appreciate it, because we do want it presented at that level as well for discussion, and that's great. I mean, the question I have is related to other potential developments that we're aware of in the McAdoo Lane area, and I guess I worry as a rural councillor that if we don't have some pre-designations happening, when is a no? Like, when is something does that allow developers with who just want to dream up anything that they think might be successful, like what, and then they manage to, like, are we leaving ourselves vulnerable when we don't designate certain areas for certain types of development, whether it's hamlets or clusters and that kind of thing? That's why I had hoped that we would have a little more reviews, secondary reviews in certain areas of the rural area, is that something that we're also working on?
Ms. Gummo.
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship. That's an excellent point. So essentially, in the past, we really haven't done a lot of pre-studying, but it sounds to me like through the economic development work that's happening, that there will be more of a focus on that pre-studying. I also just wanted to note that McAdoo's Lane is an interesting example, because that's been on the books as an employment area for kind of since the beginning, as far as I can tell. So that has been identified as an industrial area for a very long time.
Yes, thank you for that. It certainly is. And south of McAdoo Lane, I think there is tremendous potential there. But it's about the right, again, it's about being in the right places. And I think that's what the rural community is very concerned about. And what is a hub? What is a rural hub?
Who would like to take that question? CEO Hurdle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, I'll get started, and Ms. Oblanis or Mr. Desjardins might want to jump in as well. But really what we're looking at is a cluster, Councillor Oosterhoff, is an area where we would have a cluster of businesses. So I think that that's been happening in some areas. So if you think of McAdoo's Lane, for example, I think some of that has been happening informally. Even though it wasn't designated as a business cluster, it has over time really resulted in a business cluster.
Okay, yeah, okay, that helps me. So that's a hub that I can live with there. I mean, the comment here was that rural residents should expect the same level of study and detailed planning rather than developer-led approaches. And I guess that's one of the cries for the rural community, is that we lead the way, but also listen to developers that have ideas and opportunities, and then place them well. And that's kind of on our minds right now. I will have more questions later, Mayor Patterson. I'll pass for now.
Okay, thank you. Actually, Deputy Mayor, will you take the chair?
I will, Mayor Patterson, and I recognize you.
Thank you. I'm just going to jump in with a couple of questions. I do see a couple of other councillors on the list, so I'll get back to you. So my first question, I guess, just related to Councillor Oosterhoff's comments about McAdoo's Lane, and the report does make reference to the employment land strategy review that talks about McAdoo's Lane as being identified as an area for industrial development, and to try to focus businesses in that area and discourage kind of scattershot industrial business throughout the rural area. But I noticed that there was also a comment in the report that there have been some challenges with private wells and private services, and that has caused problems with some development proposals in the past. So I guess my question is there anything that we need to do to address that, to encourage that development in McAdoo's Lane if we've identified it as a good location for a cluster? Deputy Mayor, I think that CEO Hurdle has her hand raised.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm supposed to lead that. Sorry about that. Yes,
okay.
I cannot see all that. Sorry, CEO Hurdle, go ahead.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm not sure if any of my colleagues on this call might have a bit more information on servicing than I would. I would say that it depends on the nature of the business as well. So for example, we have Manitoulin that has recently established their business along McAdoo's Lane, and they've been able to work with their business growth on private services. So that has worked out. So I think it depends on the type of business, the type of service that they require, and also the technology, because that changes over time as well. So that's something else that we need to keep in mind. If others have more information on some of the maybe past years where we may have had some more challenges with private servicing, I see that Andrea Gummo has her hand up, so she probably has a bit more information.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship, I do have a little bit more information. So in part because of the source water protection work that the conservation authorities have done, we do know quite a bit about our water situation. Of course, all of Eastern Ontario is in the same boat where we're a highly vulnerable aquifer, in part because of the fractured bedrock and that kind of thing. There are areas north of Kingston, including on McAdoo's Lane, that I've heard of anecdotally where people will attempt to drill for a well and they just come up dry. So they can't find those little pockets of water. So we do see that kind of across the geography. In some locations, there's absolutely tons of water, and then in some, they can't actually get any. So that's part of the reason why when we do look at development in the rural area, we require people to make sure that there is water available. But as CAO Hurdle mentioned, there are a number of employment uses that really do not require water in any real quantity. Sometimes they're referred to as dry industries. And so in that case, even if there's no water available, that employment use, that actually may be an excellent location for it, as opposed to another user that does require a lot of water. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's helpful. I think I just wanted to make sure that we had that alignment, that if our economic development strategy is focusing on an area, that we're not focusing on an area that might have barriers, or if there are barriers that we can quickly identify, how best to address that. So thank you. My other question is that in the middle of the current pandemic, of course, remote working has really taken off. It's difficult for us necessarily to project exactly how much of that will be permanent, but how does that shift? How is that incorporated in some of the planning work that we're now doing when we think about employment lands and we think about that development strategy and land use planning? What, if anything, changes? Are we still kind of planning based on that old paradigm, or are there ways that we can kind of incorporate those, new and running changes that we see happening into that planning work as we go forward?
So I'm happy to respond to that, Your Worship, and just add some context in terms of how we're considering and looking at remote working as an opportunity in Kingston. Certainly one of the key value propositions that Kingston has that we've identified is the fact that there's a 14.5 million population within a 3-hour drive, i.e. close to Toronto, Montreal, and Ottawa, which really uniquely positions Kingston as a prime source for remote working and people to have a better quality of life than perhaps they may be able to garner in some of the urban centers. And so this is part of one of the recommendations, certainly in the integrated strategy. And also as we look at opportunities on the rural side specifically, certainly an opportunity on the rural side, which is why, I know we've talked about broadband and we know that there's implications in terms of trying to get that in there, but it is pretty important to look at those types of things. But certainly remote working is very much part of the overall integrated strategy to be able to leverage that market access that Kingston does have. That is Kingston is the only city in Canada that actually has that close proximity, not even Toronto, because they're not close to other urban centers that are as large. So Kingston truly is the only city in Canada to leverage that. So we think that is a significant economic opportunity.
Thank you, Laura. Mayor Patterson?
Thank you. My last question, I think for Ms. Gummo. So the province is now allowing us to make these adjustments in our urban boundary where we would swap land, so to speak. Does it have to be like for like? So if you want more employment land, you need to swap out existing employment land within your urban boundary and then residential for residential, or is there more flexibility there?
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Your Worship. That's a great question. At this point, the PPS is not specific on that, but I do know that in the past, the ministry has looked for it to be like for like. And there's a lot of talk of, apples and oranges and not trying to compare them. So I would expect that to be a factor. But I also wonder if a municipality demonstrated an oversupply of one land use and an undersupply of another, I would expect the ministry to consider that. But of course, we haven't been able to get anything from them in terms of additional detail at this point.
Thank you. I return the chair to you, Mayor Patterson.
Great, thank you. Next on my list is Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship. I just want to get a little bit of clarity on the recommendation that speaks to the 25-hectare expansion of the St. Lawrence Business Park. And it is going back to this swapping of land. If we approve that recommendation today, I just find it hard to approve that when we don't know what kind of land we may be swapping it for. And if we do approve it and the type of land that staff then recommends or identifies, and we're not satisfied with that, are we bound to the expansion of the 25 hectares?
CEO Hurley.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. I can't seem to start my video. I think the clerks, there we go. Thank you, and through you. So the recommendation that's in front of council tonight would not finalize the addition of this 25 hectares in our land inventory. What it would do is it would prioritize that specific area should we need to or want to grow our employment land as we do our update to our next official plan. So basically we will need to do some review and studies of our employment land, just like we will need to do that for our residential land and what we have left considering our population and housing growth. So we'll have to start these studies shortly, because believe it or not, the update to the official plan is coming up soon, although it feels like it wasn't that long ago. So in review of our employment land, if we were to not have sufficient employment land, what we are recommending to council is that this area be prioritized as an area of expansion. Does that address your question, Councillor?
But should we decide to go ahead with that, it is on the approval that we're satisfied with what kind of land we may swap with that. We still make that decision later on.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. You would make the decision later on, and it doesn't mean that we would need to swap. It may actually be that we need this additional land to plan for future growth, because we've had quite a lot of sales in our employment lands in the last few years. So we have obviously sold some of it. So what we have left available to grow should be less in our next update. So we may actually need this land to grow and may not need to swap. But yes, this would come back to council for approval.
And I do have one more question, and it's similar to Councillor Neal's concern in the rural area. I just wonder, what's the definition of a hamlet? Are we actually talking about like a rural subdivision, or what's a hamlet?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, I can answer that question. Our official plan actually identifies specific hamlets north of the city. And I'm going to forget them if I try to list them, but it's Elginburg, yes, Sunnyside. There's a number of them that are specifically identified. And then of course we know locally, there are also other areas that are crossroads, but aren't settlement areas. So Glen Burnie, for example, is not really identified individually. So it's interesting. It's a little bit, the way that we use hamlet in the official plan is a little bit different from just a population threshold of a settlement. It's actually got a specific meaning, and it's basically a rural settlement area. Verify if
So the business clusters may not end up as a hamlet. Like how do we ensure that we're not just expanding?
Right. So it would really depend on the specifics of the cluster, whether it would be better located in a specific hamlet or whether it would be in the rural area. It would depend on the uses. Some rural employment uses would not be appropriate in a hamlet, and some would be very well suited there. So it really it gets into a lot of detail at that point.
Dennis, I see your hand is raised. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, just to add, thank you, Your Worship. So just to add to Ms. Gummo's comments and how we've been working to align the potential opportunities for location and uses to align with the city's plan. And as Ms. Gummo's highlighted on the hamlet and the definition of the hamlets, what we've done for the assessment in the potential uses for cluster development business parks, as some have highlighted them as, would be to concentrate those in the areas around the different hamlets. And so there's several hamlets that would be more akin to even greater expansion or development for different types of uses, depending on what's in those particular areas, whether it's construction or other types of parks or cluster development that could occur. It really varies depending upon the hamlet, but those things are certainly being considered in terms of options that you'll see in the report, so that it is aligned with the hamlet and the cluster development to create critical masses where you can.
Councilor Doherty, you have the floor if you have any other questions. No. Okay.
No, thanks.
Okay, we'll go to Councilor Rosanek.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, the first question is about the airport lands. And I have this picture, but I also have sent it to the clerks if they could bring it up. It's smaller. So that would be parcel 5. Thanks, James. It's not, maybe just double click it again. It doesn't come up.
We'll just give you 1 second to see if we can get it up.
Okay. So it's a question for Mr. Hugenbos, just to clarify what my understanding is. So for parcel 5, what the recommendation is, as part of the big recommendation tonight, is that we wouldn't be looking at neighborhood services in parcel 5 because that would require water, but we would be looking if, you know, the will is there and the development is there and the money is there to then just expand, like in parcel 5, just develop the southern portion of parcel 5 where that blue circle is, because that's what's proposed for future hangars. And the access would be just down in the southern section. And that would also retain the majority of all the trees that are north of that point. Is that true, Mr. Hugenbos?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, I just trying to start my video, but either way, yes, Councilor Rosanek, you are correct. And you've got the right location. It's at the bottom of parcel 5, and we'd be looking at general aviation related uses like hangars that don't need water and sewer, that can be located at the airport, be part of the airport uses with the airport zoning, but not require water and sewer, not have the neighborhood commercial out on Bay Ridge Drive. Yeah, you're 100% correct.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Then my second question is about the picture that's called Expansion Highway 15. And it's just a Google Maps shot of where the 60 acres is expected. And so when I looked at a high level view, like I saw from Highway 15, it's just farm fields like north of the Tim Hortons Distribution Center. But then on the far east side, along where I guess there's a creek, it looked like forest. But then when I zoomed down further from this picture, it did look like there's trees, but they're more dispersed, not as dense. The only dense part of treed areas might be right along the buffer lands to the creek there. So my question if we approve this tonight, when it gets closer to actually expanding out the urban growth boundary, can we have assurance that we will have a wide buffer to that water body there in the picture? And that we're not going to then expand, you know, with a little 15-meter buffer, even a 30-meter buffer is pretty thin. We would give a significant buffer to try to preserve trees that are right along that water body.
Yeah, and through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, Councillor Sanik. So all that work would have to be done on documenting the trees and looking at the water body. As you can see, I recall from the Tim Hortons Distribution Center, that is quite a significant setback. I remember working on that. I can't tell you off the top of my head, but I can tell by the legend that it is, in addition to 30 meters, that is a setback. So we'd be looking to protect under the current rules as they are when and if the land were to be added to the urban boundary and gone through all the studies, put the zoning on it, do all that. So all that work will be done, I can assure you. And I do agree with you. It is not per se a forest. It is relatively dispersed. I have walked the property, not yesterday, but I have in the past. But yes, all that work would have to be done and those protections would be in place.
Okay, thank you. Then my third question is about the last photo diagram that I submitted, and it jumps over to the Cataraqui business estates. And so I'm just talking tonight about the portion on the east side. So that's on the right-hand side of the green line that says EPA, and that runs down along Resources Road. Those lands, those are private lands, right, Mr. Hugenbos, right? Like that's east of the EPA, and then they're owned by someone else. And if whoever owns those lands were to develop them, would that be joining the business park, or would that be more like future residential? Or do we know anything about those lands on the east side of Resource Road going north-south?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. So those lands to the east of Resource Road and to the east of Canada Royal Milk are privately owned. I'm trying to recall the official plan designation to them, but there are no current active planning applications that I'm aware of for them. So they continue to be raw, undeveloped land, and would need to be applied for development like any other property that would be within the Planning Act, so official plan, zoning, plan of subdivision, depending on what the owner wished to do with them.
Okay, so they would be up for development possibly at some time, and it's not like those forests will stay forests, but we don't know right now. Okay, thank you. And my very last question then is about actually maybe for Mr. Keach, about what is the history of the water tower at Milton subdivision? Like, since we're talking about not expanding our water, and I'm pretty sure that Milton, that we don't have water mains going all the way to Milton, and I think it's definitely on septic. I know we looked at a house in there a long time ago. It's on septic, but they have a water tower. So does that mean they do have city water? How does Milton subdivision work in terms of rural water?
So I may get Jim Miller to jump in here. He's probably got a little bit more of the specifics in that regard, but I know the Milton Tower is actually a redundant piece of infrastructure. We've been doing a fair amount of work with the Army base on the east side in regards to water and whatnot. And there's a couple, I think that, and the tower on the Army base is also redundant. But I think you're right. There is water services in some areas and not wastewater services in some areas. It's a bit. It was developed prior to the type of planning restrictions that are in place now that was talked about. Oh. So I wonder if Jim actually would maybe just give a couple of little bit more specific comments in regards to the servicing in that area.
Thank you.
Through your worship, Jim is correct. That area known as the St. Lawrence community has its planning history and development history that dates back to the 70s. And there were some very deliberate decisions made by the municipality of the day relative to how that development would occur. And specifically, south side of number 2 highway at the time would be serviced with water only. No services to the north side of Highway 2. So consequently, water is out along the Highway 2 area. It does service the subdivisions between the Army base and Milton to the tower. So the tower does represent the furthest east location of municipal water. And so that tower is currently active. However, there are some long-term infrastructure plans to eventually eliminate that tower, but there's other work to be done before that would happen.
Interesting. Okay, thank you very much. Those are my questions.
Okay, are there other questions from council? Councillor Chappelle.
Thank you, through your worship. I appreciate the opportunity to address my colleagues tonight. I was really excited to hear about a rural strategy, and I'm somewhat disappointed that the only rural aspect was it's too costly to develop the rural community, and most of these plans are all south of the 401 for economic development lands. So I think it's a bit of a misnomer, and I'm not sure the value of hiring a consultant to do that work. Anyways, with respect to that consultant, Stiletto Group, is this an additional cost in addition to what we're paying for the KEDCO development plan, or is this the same plan?
See you.
Thank you, and through Mr. Mayor. So there are elements that cross over from the rural economic development into the integrated economic development strategy, because rural is part of Kingston as well. There are elements that cross over, but there are also elements that we have requested that be further developed because of the council strategic priority, that there is an additional cost for that work that we have requested.
Okay, but that didn't come to council. That was obviously under the $50,000 limit, and it didn't come to council for consideration.
Through Mr. Mayor, so I know that Mr. Desjardins has been working more closely on this project, but yes, I believe so, and it would have been also in collaboration with our business and employment land uses.
Desjardins.
Through your worship to the councillor, yes, that is correct. It was under the 50,000. I would also point out that there is a full rural economic strategy that is coming to the Rural Advisory Committee next Monday, and it is quite fulsome. So I think the council will be pleased with that content.
I'd like to make a compliment on the Clogs Road. I'm really pleased that development is happening here, those 53 and 64 acres. I'm glad that was on planning when that was being approved, and I was assured by city staff that the city would be up on its planning fees at that time. So I'm happy to see that's progressing well. With regards to the airport, I do share some concerns with Councillor Senek on parcel 5, and of course I don't want to lose parcel 3 because I can't afford the golfing fees that one of my other councillors enjoys at a different golf course. So I do enjoy having parcel 3 available for golf. I do believe that parcels 2, 3, and 6 are certainly good to develop and would encourage moving forward with that for development lands. With respect to asking council to reaffirm these plans tonight.
So, Councillor Chappelle,
my question.
Okay, so there is a question? Just because we will have comments.
I have lots of questions. Lots of questions.
Question.
So my question, then I have an additional question for Ms. Gumo. I was really pleased to hear a comment about planning policy about the efficient use of land patterns to reduce GHG emissions. And I'm wondering how that was not incorporated with the approval of SPA.
So Councillor Chappelle, that's outside of the scope of what we're talking about here tonight.
Okay, I'll go on to another question then. With regards to the swapping out of land, we already addressed this a little bit. I would very much like you, since you haven't done an assessment of what lands to swap out, and my question is really twofold to you, Ms. Gummel, as well as to Mr. Hugenboss. The swapping out of land for similar parcels, I would very much like you to, to know if you would consider lot 452 in the Cataraqui Woods subdivision, so that it retains a more natural environment. And then two, if I end up voting to affirm these tonight, does that prevent me from removing lot 542 from future developments at a later date? Or how can I assure that that is retained as a woodlot, a natural space that it won't be developed?
Hugenboss.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. So a couple of things on the swapping of land for the urban boundaries. So if council directs staff to prioritize the work to look at the 60-acre expansion at St. Lawrence Business Park, we'd be focusing on doing it with the next OP update, which working under the PPS and with the province's rules may not necessarily require land swapping. We do need to look at the supply of employment lands that we have in the city, all the recent sales that we've had that have reduced that supply. We have sold in the almost 130 acres of land in our serviced area over the last 4 or 5 years, which has outpaced our projections and the last employment land strategy projections. So that is part of it, because we know the city is by far the leading supplier of serviced employment lands. The private land is typically not sold and is held for a number of years. So that all would play into the rationale that would be developed for that 60 acres north of St. Lawrence Business Park, and that work would need to be done. That said, if council chooses to take out some existing employment lands within the urban boundary, then yes, that would support that case. Lot 452 is in St. Lawrence Business Park. It fronts onto Resource Road there north of Canada Royal Milk. That road was very recently built through a grant from EODF as part of expanding the Cataraqui Business Park. So staff would need some time to look at the options available to council to remove that particular property out of the land inventory. Of course, we have made a number of sales. We are down in inventory, and it will be a number of years to get Clogs Road up and running and in other areas. So, but I would say, Mayor, respectfully, if council does want to go that direction, I wouldn't see that as contradictory to tonight's recommendations. We aren't talking about Cataraqui Estate Business Park per se. And if council at a later date would like to discuss bringing 452 out of the land inventory, I'd be happy to work with councillors who are interested in that, so that we can inform council of any and all issues that would relate to pulling it out of the inventory. Because I wouldn't be able to do that tonight. That's all.
Thank you. CEO Hurdle.
Thank you, and through Mr. Mayor. So I just want to add that if I recalling properly, and this is somewhere that maybe Andrea can help me out, but I believe there's also a process that's required to change the designation when we're dealing with industrial designated land. We went through that with 700 Gardner's Road. So I don't believe that it's as easy as having a council decision, but we would need to do some studies that would be associated with this change in land use designation.
Thank you. Councillor Chappell.
Yes, with respect to water going north of 401, I appreciate the work that Utilities Kingston has done. And my question was really with regards to the area of McAdoo's Lane. From what I understand, pre-amalgamation, that area was promised water. And I'm just wondering, at what point will we ever bring water to them if it's in the forecasted plan? It's, you said tonight, Mr. Priest, there isn't in the plan. How do we make that a priority? Because at some point, that area is in desperate need of having water service.
Mr. Keach.
So, I can answer part of the question, at least, but in regards to is it in the plan or has it been in the plan? So since I'll say Utilities Kingston has existed after the amalgamation, we have not had any concrete plans to bring water or sewer to the area, and there currently does not exist any. We did provide obviously some pricing, and I explained how we got that this evening, but as far as concrete plans, is it in the long-term budget or whatnot? It is not, and you know, at the moment, it's not our intention to do that unless we receive different direction.
Okay. I have one final question, Your Worship.
Just before you do, I think CAO Hurdle wanted to add something. Mr. Keach, you were cutting in and out a little bit there, so I'm not sure if Council got that full answer. CAO Hurdle?
Utilities Kingston.
Thank you. So maybe just to add to Mr. Keach's comments, the water to this area has never been part of the plan, and that's what the report indicates. It is not part of our current long-term capital plan. And to your question around how do we make that happen, so one of the things council would need to do is change the urban boundary, because we cannot bring water and sanitary services in an area that is not within the urban boundary for growth purpose. So council would also need to understand that to expand the urban boundary, that would mean not only expanding for employment uses, it would mean expanding for other types of uses, which could include residential. So essentially what we would be doing is expanding our urban area, and that would no longer be considered rural, it would be considered part of the urban area. Of course, that would need to be approved by the ministry as well and would require a number of studies to do that.
Final question. So several months ago, September of last year, we passed a unanimous motion on water security for rural communities. And to this point, nothing's been actioned on that item other than one meeting. One of the issues is that Conservation Authority does not have a hydrogeologist on staff. We don't have a hydrogeologist in the city of Kingston. So I was so pleased to hear, Ms. Gumo, that you had spoken about the fractured limestone substrate that we have throughout the majority of Kingston and the concerns that we have with water quality for such areas. Is there a mechanism in place for future growth and economic development that makes sure that water is the priority to be consulted upon with development of any type in rural Kingston?
Thank you, through you, Your Worship. I'm gonna take a stab at it, and if I haven't quite captured your question, please do let me know. So essentially, I'm sorry, my mind just went blank.
No worry about it.
It's been such a long day. Would you mind reminding me of your question? I'm so sorry.
So this council has passed a unanimous motion on protecting source water protection, and actually asked that we work with the city and the Conservation Authority to go beyond just the current mapping that was done in 2007 and look at water quality and quantity. But nothing has happened. It's been over a year, so we've made no progress. We don't have a hydrogeologist on staff in the city of Kingston. We don't have a hydrogeologist on staff with the Conservation Authority. So because we don't have those experts in the field or the data in place, I'm asking if there's to be economic development in the future in the rural parts of Kingston, if planning can seriously look at water as a key factor, the primary factor before development is approved.
Thank you so much. So yes, absolutely. Water is certainly one of the the key considerations of any development in the rural area. In terms of ensuring kind of the ongoing quality of water, we do have a number of sort of parameters for development that address that. And interestingly enough, one of them involves directing the majority of our development to the urban area, which does have full services. So I think that's an important consideration too. Some of the province's approach to ensuring long-term protection of water resources does involve this sort of highlighted urban versus rural approach to things.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Okay, so we'll go to a second round. So first as Deputy Mayor Oosterhoff and then Councillor Hutchison. Deputy Mayor Oosterhoff.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. And just to continue with Councillor Chappelle, I thank him for his questions related to water. And I guess I'm also going to ask Mr. Keach and Utilities Kingston for some input here. And I don't want to say everything I say is absolute, but 2 years ago I did request some studies being done for communities that that have actually expanded their water. I really appreciate the work that we even saw, even the base drawing. As a rural councillor from my community, I know exactly the areas that are in concern. When I saw the rough drawing, I understand, Mr. Keach, that it's very rough. There's no engineerings, but when I saw the loop for McAdoo Lane, that's fantastic to me, and the potential for the loop coming from Sydenham Road to the Elginburg community should the quarry expand. I think these are reasons why we should request, I think council should ask that we at least advance the studies of what it would take to be, and I am not trying to be obstinate here, CAO Hurdle, but I believe there are communities that have been successful in requesting of the government. If we never have the conversation, it will never happen. And I can in my research, Ottawa has been able to do it. Waterloo, Guelph, Minto, Brockville, Essex. I know for Carleton Place, Cornwall. These are communities that have to be researched a bit. I'm not saying it's absolutely everything, but I think that these are communities that have been able to expand water to critical areas because of water security issues and related things that should be able to drive that discussion. And so that's what I would like to hear some feedback on. Why haven't we? I think sometimes, forgive me, but I think sometimes we use old arguments. I believe today is a new day. We have climate change. We have opportunity. The pandemic is challenging us to drive the conversation in new ways now. And the rural area has these needs, it has these potentials way beyond just building another industrial park, because a lot of the industrial parks that we could do, McAdoo Lane, I want to expand on that. It's probably going to be some net zero. It's going to be self-sustaining, but we need to open the door a little bit more to that potential. And I feel that we should be doing the work now and then being ready for that opportunity. Because if we don't do the work now, it's a plan. No plan means a plan to fail. So I just want to discuss that.
Hey, Mary, your question is about other municipalities that have been able to take water outside of the urban boundary. Is that right?
Yeah, I'd like to know, thank you, Mayor Patterson. Sorry for rambling, but I would like to know, have we actually, in the last year, 2 years, have we sat down and prepared a discussion that could drive that? We're going to ask for, and I support the St. Lawrence Business Park expansion. I think it's too small. I wish we could go larger because I believe that potential there is significant investment for the potential economic gain for our city. But I wish that we would also include the discussion points so that it's not tabled too far back that we can't pick it up again? What can we not include the potential without wastewater, but to have the permissions to expand water should we need it in a water security issue?
CEO Hurdle.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor, some of my colleagues may want to jump in as well because I am by no means an expert in all those areas. But I can assure you, Councillor Oosterhoff, these regulations are not regulations that I have created or the city has created. They're provincial regulations. I think you'll recall from Ms. Gummo's presentation in regards to provincial policies, it talked about servicing and the province actually discouraging individual servicing. So discouraging, for example, water only, unless there were issues with potable water. So if there was an issue, for example, where we had an area in the rural area where there wasn't access or there was a risk of not having access to potable water, I believe that's where the provincial policy, we could look at applying that. But I'm not aware of the province, and this is not the municipality, but I'm not aware of the province indicating that servicing for water is something that they can consider and support just for development purpose, because what we're talking about here is to enable growth in the rural area outside of the urban boundary. So I just want to be clear, that's what we're talking about currently. So to my knowledge, the policies do not encourage that. If council would like us to go in that direction, I will gladly, and the staff will gladly work on that, Councillor Oosterhoff. If it is a council direction, that's what we would work with. At this point, I don't think that's been part of the council direction. I think actually what we heard tonight were quite a lot of concerns about expansion of any kind of urban boundary. So I think, again, it may not be the reflection or the opinion of every single councillor, but at the end of the day, staff do have to work with council directions.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I really do. And perhaps that might come, but I would suggest that McAdoo Lane, for example, fits the bill. It is a toxic area. We're talking decades of abuse, and which is time to stop that and to turn the corner. And so I realized they were only old plans 40, 50 years ago when they wanted to bring water there, but what more convincing could we have than to know that is water, that area, the water doesn't exist, but it's also extremely toxic. So it would make sense to me in the potential for development and commercial industrial in that zone, that water would qualify because of that area.
Ms. Gummo?
Thank you, through you, Your Worship. I want to provide just a little bit of context around when water is extended to deal with contamination. So that doesn't happen for industrial areas. That happens for residential areas. So when you have a residential, like a bunch of houses, and there's a contamination issue, then the Ministry of Environment, which is MECP these days, they can do orders to require the person or the business responsible for the contamination to actually pay for provision of water, or sometimes they actually fund it themselves, because it sometimes, like, if people are aware of the village of Sydenham, just north of us, they had contamination due to very small lot sizes and too many septic systems too close together. So in cases like that, it tends to be more of a government solution, but in cases when it's an individual a kind of body that creates the contamination, they are responsible for providing clean water. But I haven't ever seen it done into an industrial area because actually there's no requirement to remediate soil in an industrial area if it's going to continue to be used for industrial uses. The requirement to remediate the soil would happen when somebody wants to put residential there, or sometimes commercial. Thank you.
Thanks. I guess the question that I also have, Mayor Patterson, is the St. Lawrence Business Park, have they is that the 60 acres or some hectares? Is that actually as large as we can achieve there? Is that as large a request as we can make?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. So yes, Councillor Surhoff. So that area is determined by what the city owns, and that is why we are proposing to expand that boundary to the limits of what we own, and getting back to Councillor Osanek of what is within reach of the existing park and the existing services to the south, and not getting any closer to the water body to the east.
Thank you.
Councillor Hutchison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to concentrate on the third clause, which has to do with the 60 acre, but 25 hectare expansion to the St. Lawrence Business Park. And so my questions are directed primarily to Mr. Hugenboss. According to the report on page 13 of 21, and I'm looking to get corrected here in case I'm off in the wrong direction here. The city has access to 100 acres in existing city-owned business parks and 85 acres in the future city business park. And if we add the St. Lawrence Business Park, 25 hectares, or what's the same thing, 60 acres, we end up with 245 existing and potential employment land, employment lands, okay? Acres of employment land. Mr. Hugenboss, that's correct, right? This is just a start question.
Yes, we have just over 100 existing business parks, and there's the 85 represents the net developable projected area for Clogs Road, and then the 60 is the gross acreage at the lands north of St. Lawrence Business Park.
So what I want to get at is why we need to expand the St. Lawrence Business Park. There's quite a lot in the report. It's a good and interesting report.
Yeah.
I want to be really clear about this. So is all the land inside the current business park sold?
Yeah, so I can answer that in a couple ways, but I want to get back to some of the data that we kind of went over probably a little quickly in the presentation. So over the past 4 or 5 years, the city has sold between 120, 130 acres of service land. So that takes that out of the readily available supply of land available, which were mandated in the provincial policies statement as a community to have access to serviced employment land. So in order to replenish that supply, we're looking at the Clogs Road development and the St. Lawrence Business Park expansion. Those will not come online quickly. It takes 3 to 5 years, to get the studies done, develop the plans, get the approvals, and build the roads. In the interim, as you noted, Councillor Hutchison, we have just over 100 acres right now. So if the trend continues and we continue to sell at basically the same rate that we've been selling, then what we have right now would get us through the next 3 to 5 years. But we have to plan now in order to get the lands available for the 5 years after that. So that's really how that works. So so we don't have 240 some odd acres that you're talking about right now ready to sell, because the one part of it's not in the boundary, and the rest of it hasn't been approved for development. So that's how we get there, and that's why we have that recommendation here tonight.
Fair enough, and thank you for that. Is the rate of employment land uptake, the ones that we're able to sell, do we know what the rate is? Do we have a number for that? And does it include Fahey, which is after all, a once in a generation uptake.
So yeah,
you can see where I'm going here. I'm looking to see if the 25 hectares are necessary, and
sure.
like
So,
I staff's word for that. But the point is, it's more at how much leeway have we got? And so if you could answer that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, so a couple things. So yes, it does include Canada Royal Milk. That was 38 acres. So of the well over 100 acres, 120, 130, somewhere in there, 38 were Canada Royal Milk. The rest were other land sales, a variety of land sales. So that is included in the rate, but it is significantly less than half of those sales. So the risk you run as a community, other than being non-compliant with provincial policy statement and making sure we have a readily available supply, is that you can't just have inventory. If we just had one big parcel of 100 acres, that also wouldn't do it, because we sell land for half an acre, and we sell land to 38 acres, and we sell land and all variations in between. So the variety is key. The locations are key, and it is a prudent process for the city to continue as it's done, to bring on these lands and able to respond to the various opportunities that can come the city's way, as far as expansion opportunities for homegrown businesses, as well as the foreign direct investment, such as the Frulax and Canada Royal Milk.
So I don't think I got it was a good answer, but I don't think I got an answer to whether all the land inside the St. Lawrence Business Park is sold.
Sorry. So no, it's not. There is a significant amount has been sold, and actually we were able, as council knows, to repurchase 33 acres from Tim Hortons. They had bought a very large parcel there, but have since changed plans. So that definitely has assisted us right now, because again, Clogs Road, St. Lawrence Business Park expansions will be several years away. So having that land on that service road definitely helps us in that interim period. And if it wasn't for that, the very vast majority of the park, I think about 85% had been sold.
So as I understand it, the 25 acres that is outside the urban boundary that we're looking at tonight, would it not have to take 3 to 5 acres itself, including all the studies and submissions that have to be made?
Yes, sorry, years, 3 to 5 years. I think you said acres. Yeah.
Yeah, did I? I meant years.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, absolutely. So we'd have to get through the boundary expansion process with the official plan update, and then look at updating the zoning, putting a potential plan of subdivision on it, doing studies that would be in addition to whatever was done to get the boundary expansion. So I would say at 3 years would not be realistic. I think we're definitely into the 5-year range for selling property, unless somehow it was significantly fast tracked for a specific purpose.
Right, and we would be delivering water there, correct? All services.
That would be the intent. They're right next door. Yeah.
So as you can see, the urban boundary, changing it is pretty controversial, and I've heard about it from my constituents for sure. They want to know why, and that's why I'm trying to dig these thoughts out. So in the report, as I understood it, it talks about the provincial policy statement, and if we wanted to do expand by 25 hectares or 60 acres, we would have to do certain studies and meet certain criteria. So why not do those studies first, then make a decision to apply to the province? And we could do those studies in a way that would support the OP reconsideration that's coming up anyway. So I'm not quite sure why, I won't say we're rushing, but why we're entertaining this now when we could ask for permission from council to start the process, but not make a final decision.
CEO Hurdle. CEO Hurdle, you're just muted.
I'm sorry. So thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So in the report recommendation, we talk about prioritizing an official plan amendment. So that would be done through our next official plan update. So the only thing we want to make sure is that if we do need additional employment lands, because we talked about how we've sold a lot of employment lands in the last number of years, that we would want to prioritize this parcel as our next area of growth for employment land. So that's why we've put it in here. It's actually something that council had included in the last official plan update for the city. It was turned down by the province because at the time the province felt that we had sufficient supply. But when we do have another look at the supply, what we're saying is, we're not saying let's apply right now to the province. We're saying let's prioritize this through our official plan amendment and update when we get to that process.
Okay. I'm not sure that answered my question, but the point I was making is, if it's controversial, and certainly the numbers of council are a bit concerned about expanding the urban boundary. I was talking to Ms. Hurdle, she disappeared. Then why don't we just ask council for permission to do the studies, which you're gonna do anyway? I mean, the last OP was done in 2015, and it has to be done, as I understand it. It was supposed to be done this year, I think. 5 years, correct? 5, 6 years. So the studies are necessary, but the decision, it would be good to know more before we make the decision. That's basically my argument. And so the way I look at it is, that third clause may pass tonight, but if it doesn't pass, then I'd be fine coming back in a different way. Because I'm not sure of all the implications. I mean, I've read the report, but there's a lot of information in there, and there's 2 different ways of going about it. You do the, well, it's under the provincial policy statement, or you do it the way through the official plan, right? Either way, you got to do the studies or portions thereof. We've done that before through planning for other things. So that's my suggestion. Otherwise, also, is a suggestion to expand the urban boundary and bring in 25 hectares of St. Lawrence business plan a way of trying to quiet the lion heart of Councillor Oosteroff about getting more water into the rural area?
CEO Hurdle.
So thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So Councillor Hutchison, you're right that the last official plan update was done about 5 years ago, and we're due for another update. So you will recall in the last update from 2015, I think well before Councillor Oosteroff had raised the question of water in the rural area on council, we were already recommending the expansion of employment lands north of the St. Lawrence Business Park, which at the time was supported by the previous council, and again was included in the draft official plan, but denied by the province. Right. So this is not new. From a staff perspective, this is not new. We had conducted the studies and went through the entire process.
Right. I wasn't suggesting anything nefarious, okay? I just thought, you know, maybe Gary needs something and we're going to try and give it to him. So okay, that's that's my questions, and I guess we'll discuss each clause as we go. I'll request now, if I may, that we separate the clauses, since two of them have to be separated anyway.
So just a note that we already have to separate clause 1 and 4 for Councillor Boehm's pecuniary interest. So what I propose is that we'll just go clause by clause when we get to the vote. Okay. However, discussion can be on all clauses, just so we're clear on that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions? I see Councillor Doherty.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I also to ask a study, but I guess the swapping of land that we're discussing tonight, that's been really introduced, and that's instead of comprehensive review. Is that correct?
Ms. Kimmel?
Thank you, through you. Yes, the swapping or the expansion, those are tools that are at our disposal.
So this swap suggests then that there would be no review done at all. It's just that particular land that you may be swapping would make sense or may align in obviously numbers of acres, for example.
There would still need to be analysis done. One of the additional kind of refinements that they've made in this newest version of the PPS is clarifying that basically the scale and complexity of the supporting documentation should match the amount of change that's happening. And again, that wasn't actually an option before. So whether you wanted to do like a tiny minor adjustment or like create a new city, the test was the same. So now they're offering more flexibility in terms of how you approach it. I guess at a high level, like it still has to be justifiable and it still has to make sense in terms of the broader goals of the PPS and certainly of the city itself. Yeah, I hope that helps a little.
Thanks. That's it.
Okay, CEO Hurdo, you wanted to add something?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So at this point, from a staff perspective, we would not recommend a swapping of land where we would remove privately designated land for municipal designated land. We would not recommend that to council. Instead, we think that going the route of doing the studies and prioritizing, if there's a need for more land, prioritizing the expansion of the St. Lawrence Business Park, should we not have sufficient land, that would be the preferred route. We would not want to hurt our local property owners and remove their land designation for the benefit of the city.
Okay, next is Councillor Chappelle. Councillor Chappelle, you have the floor.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd just like to support what Councillor Oosterhoff had commented upon, along with Councillor Hutchison. And that is, the water is toxic along McAdoo's Lane, and that would import the water-only option is a possibility. And I've actually confirmed that with the minister. So it's something that, if we are to look at expanding the growth of the urban boundary for if we're looking to ask to increase that urban boundary for the St. Lawrence Parkway, I would suggest perhaps, if it's the will of council, to also request to expand the urban boundary to include McAdoo's Lane, and then eventually solve that water problem up in the area and perhaps support some increase in industrial investment.
Okay, so I'm doing a last call for questions. It's not really a last call because once we get to discussion of motion, you can still ask questions, but any other questions of staff? Councillor Strider.
at the hospital, and I've just returned home at supper and changed. I just have a very basic framing question to you, Mayor Patterson, about because it was tough for me to get here tonight. I'm wondering, because this was an unscheduled council meeting, what is the time-sensitive nature of the report that required a special meeting? I know it's your right to ask for one, but why could this not have been on the council meeting a week from today?
Thank you. So I believe that this council meeting was scheduled about 5 or 6 weeks ago. I do from time to time do schedule council meetings when we are dealing with a specific area of topic where we want to do a deep dive and allow for a lot of additional discussion. So you'll see that we've been discussing this for 2 hours. I think that would be difficult to put a 2-hour conversation like this into a regular council meeting when we have a number of other agenda items to discuss. So I think it's a practice that I do allow periodically from time to time. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. So that is a good framing explanation for the special council meeting. It allows us to go, I believe this is, right as I logged on, I heard this was the second round of questions. So it allows for this kind of more of a committee of a whole type discussion. Of course, that this isn't a question, but it begs the question of how would you have known that we would have had so many questions and that this discussion would have gone in this direction prior to calling. But I guess we're finding out now why that is. There's many questions about the need for this, the timing for this, the rationale for this. And I mean, if you're a resident at home or someone coming to the meeting late like me, the obvious question is, why is this item being presented to council when it isn't really logically a result of any council direction that has happened so far? I've heard just the ends of some of the answers that my colleagues have asked, but really we're forced to sort of wrap our heads around all these details at a time when it's not clear that this follows logically from any council directive. I know it ties in indirectly to the strategic plan, but maybe the CAO could again, sorry for my absence earlier, give a synopsis of why it is that staff is asking us this rather than it coming as a request from council in the first place.
So I will allow CAO Hurdle to respond from a staff perspective. But I will say that as mayor, I do reserve the right to call special council meetings. I'm cautious to do that, because I know how busy everybody is. In this particular case, we were talking about 4 different staff briefings, all centered around the same topic, something that is not indirectly but directly connected to an item in our strategic plan. And so that was really the basis for that decision. I'll allow CAO Hurdle to add from a staff perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm happy, Councillor Stroud, to provide further clarification. So you might recall that in the actual strategic plan, so council strategic plan, under economic growth, there is a priority that's essentially reads, explore the feasibility of establishing rural business parks and associated services. The reporting back is also identified. So it is, when I read this from staff perspective, it is a direction that council has given us through the strategic plan. The reason why the timing at this point is because we have been working with the Economic Development Corporation on an integrated economic development strategy, as you know, because we had a report recently that went to council. I believe it was the last council meeting that you all received a report on an update. So we also understand that the rural area is part of Kingston and needs to be considered as part of the economic development strategy, which is why we wanted to bring this information to council, to give council a chance to actually be involved in this. And I know Councillor Oosterhoff was, quite concerned about this particular matter and wanting to make sure that there was an opportunity for council to discuss this particular strategy. So it is being brought to you because it is in response to Council's strategic plan, and the timing is connected to the integrated economic development strategy.
Thank you, CAO. Thank you. So if I am correct in your answer, one of the factors for the specifics of this recommendation was conversations with our rural councillor about the inclusion of the rural area in the economic strategy. Is that true?
CEO Hurdle.
Thank you, and through Mr. Mayor. So it's actually the councillors that are on the Economic Development Corporation board that have been engaged and involved in the integrated economic development strategy that recognize that there is a need to make sure that we include the rural area. But in order to do so, council needs to have a better understanding on the servicing component, and that's that we would expect, obviously, our Economic Development Corporation to make decisions on our own city servicing. That's something we would expect council to be engaged in those details and have the opportunity to discuss. And Councillor Oosterhoff, of course, has been part of those conversations. He is on the board of the Economic Development Corporation.
Okay. Okay, I think it's fairly clear to me now. I think I get it. So essentially, there are many factors to be considered when presented with the suggestion that economic development in the rural area should be more of a priority, or should be considered, or should be on equal footing with the urban section. I think all councillors here tonight would agree with Councillor Oosterhoff's correct and his advocacy for his district is all what we admire and like about Councillor Oosterhoff, and that question is legitimate and it requires careful deliberations. So if that's the reason for this meeting is to really have the whole of council examine the suggestion that the economic development in the rural area ought to be considered, then I think we probably agree. But if it is also true that we have to consider the servicing of the rural area with major infrastructure, such as it already exists in the urban area, which is, to be honest, a defining feature of the difference between the urban and the rural. I mean,
so Councillor Stroud, I'm giving you as much leeway as I can, but this is question time right now.
Yes, yes.
Is it a question, or are we now moving into a discussion of the recommendation before us?
No, this is a question.
Okay.
This is a question, but it is very important that we understand that the question is, can we get more information about economic development opportunities in the rural area, completely independent of the question of whether we need to expand servicing of infrastructure to the rural area? Are the two linked, or are the two possibly independent?
CEO Hurdle.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So they have the possibility to be independent, Councillor Stroud, and that's actually what city staff are recommending. That if you, I'm sure you've had a chance to have a look at the report, but that is what city staff are recommending, that we look at clusters in the rural area that would have businesses that can operate on private services, so that we do not proceed with an expansion of services. But council had also asked through the strategic plan to report back on associated services of potential business parks. And we wanted to make sure that we provided council with all the information, so that council didn't feel that we didn't report back on the cost of servicing the rural area and somehow we weren't being transparent with those elements. So we wanted to make sure council had all the information on the cost of servicing, but at the end of the day, staff are still recommending that we do not extend the services to the rural area. and that we continue to support the rural area with the development of business clusters that would be operating on private services.
Okay, that's very helpful because I would just say to my colleagues that as we vote on these recommendations, the separation between those two elements is very important because we could have consensus on one side and not on another, or both, or neither. And as long as they are separate, we will be able to make that clear at that time.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions for staff? Okay, Councillor Ostroff.
The question that I meant to ask earlier too, because I understand that this is the integrated plan, but I guess we don't hear, we haven't heard tonight, and we will hear it sometime from economic development themselves. That's a bit of a concern sometimes for me. I mean, there is the work that they do, the face of our economic development is with our Economic Development Corporation. And in my view, I think the staff do an incredible job. And they are the ones who are receiving the calls. You know, they are the ones who are you know, listening and talking and engaging with people from around the world. And they are the ones who are going to say, well, we can't serve you, or we could serve you. And the whole idea of economic development is to provide employment for our people and to provide a tax base. So are we engaged as well as we should be and could be with our Economic Development Corporation?
CEO Hurdle.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So I will start, and Mr. Desjardins may want to jump in as well, because I know he's been working actually quite closely with our Economic Development Corporation. I believe probably meetings on a weekly basis. So we are working closely with the organization. We obviously are sharing the work of a consultant that cuts across the work that's being done for the city and also work that's being done for Economic Development Corporation. We are meeting with them regularly through this work. And I can tell you that they were also provided with draft information before this report was provided to council. So maybe my colleagues want to jump in and add to that, but we do work closely with them, yes.
Thank you.
Your worship, through you to the councillor, I will confirm what the CAO has commented on. We are meeting on almost a daily basis right now with Kingston Economic Development and with the consultants. I would also add that staff from Commissioner Hugenboss's office, including from Cultural Services and from Real Estate, are also involved in those discussions and deliberations.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, at this point, then we'll move to the staff recommendations. So clause 1 is the rural economic development, associated services and employment lands. So first I'll ask for a mover and a seconder to put the recommendation on the floor. I have a mover moved by Councillor Hill, seconded by Councillor Kiley. Okay. So now we have the recommendation as a whole on the floor. As I've said, we will do votes on the individual clauses, but at this point, we'll open up the floor to any comments or discussion. Okay. Councillor Stroud.
Yes, so in view of all of the questions I've witnessed and obviously the ones that came before me, the first clause, as I read it, is essentially what CEO Hurdle was just talking about, is that supporting rural business clusters does not require public servicing, that they can do private servicing. And there's nothing about expanding the urban boundaries. It's actually contrary to that suggestion that we not expand the municipal services to service those clusters. So the first clause, as read, does not put those two things in the same one does not follow the other. My question, I do have another question for clarification about the third clause. So the 25 hectares of employment lands to the St. Lawrence Business Park. Am I correct? And I may have missed this, that this clause does not set in motion the finality of the exact nature of what is designated. That that staff will come back with the exact dimensions and coordinates of those 25 hectares. Is that correct?
CEO Hurdle.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So, Councillor Strout, you're absolutely correct that staff would be reporting back to council with more detail. As you know, we actually included these lands, these 25 hectares, in our last official plan update when you were on council, and we had to follow a process and go through the studies and then report that back to council. So we would have to do the same thing. What we're saying here is just to prioritize this area should we need to expand our future employment land.
Sorry, follow up that you can nod or add more. So an official plan amendment, that you need council direction to include it in the next official plan amendment to include this piece. Is that what you're saying?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, that's what we would do.
Okay. So then that brings me to the second clause, which is the wording is prioritize the development of employment lands to support job growth through the ongoing development of business parks, including, and there's a list there, but that doesn't actually, it's not restrictive because it says including. So what kind of, again, the question may have already been covered, what that is not listed in this clause could that also include?
CEO Hurdle.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry, Mr. Mayor. I was just trying to get my video on. Yeah. So
there's a point of order.
Sorry, I missed that. Councillor Kiley, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. I just wanted to say, aren't we dealing with only the first clause?
No. I'm going to allow,
I ask only because I'm getting confused on where our questions are falling.
Okay. So initially I had said that we were going to deal with all the discussion on all the clauses at once. And then we would we would separate the clauses. The problem that I've just realized is that Councillor Bone has removed himself for clause 1 and clause 4. So that's going to be a bit of a challenge. Just give me 1 second. Okay, so I'm going to have to change direction here because it's not going to work when we have a councillor that has a pecuniary interest, because then he could miss the discussion elements of clauses 2, 3, and 5. So Councillor Stroud, my apologies. I'm gonna shift that direction. So we're just going to focus then on discussion of clause 1. So we'll do discussion, then take a vote, discussion, then take a vote, and go like that. Okay. So sorry, folks, for that change. So discussion is now only on clause 1. Any discussion? So Councillor Stroud, you've already spoken to clause 1, I believe. So I'm just going to look next to Councillor Osterhoff.
The question I have is related to when there's a change of understanding provincial policy and our understand of land use planning. Is that when something like this can come back to the table?
So if you're asking for a procedural question, Councillor Osterhoff?
Well, right now the clause, states that it's not financially feasible, it's not supported by provincial policy, and then or principles of good land use planning, and it bothers me, that statement. It kind of bothers me because it sounds like that's an interpretation, and so it's in there, but I have a hard time supporting it, even though I understand it. No, as a rural councillor, I completely understand that municipal wastewater is not on the table. I understand the cost, and it's not. The problem is it's looking at the big picture, and that was never my intention from the original beginning. But I question why we're saying it's not supported by provincial policy when that's maybe true right now, but maybe they'll be expanded again next year, and maybe we'll understand good land use planning in a different light. So I just want to know how. I mean, it's a living document.
So, Councillor Osterhoff, you can vote against the clause. You can also, if someone votes in favor of the clause, they are also in a position to bring forward a motion of reconsideration, should there be, for example, additional information or change of interpretation to.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else on clause 1? Okay. Yes, Councillor Chappelle.
Thank you, through your worship. I'd just like to concur with Councillor Sahoff that I find the wording is very exclusionary, and I'm disappointed in the way it's phrased. Thank you.
Okay, we will call the vote then on clause 1. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries by a vote of 9-3. Councillor Osterhoff, Chappelle, and Stroud opposed. Okay, so now we will move to clause 2. Councillor Bohm can rejoin the meeting at this point. Okay, any discussion on clause 2? Councillor Stroud.
Yes. So there was a point of order in the middle of my question on this clause. My question was, what else could be included that is not specifically listed in the clause? Because it says ongoing development of business parks, including, but it does not say including only or words to that effect. So what else could be in this basket if this passes?
CEO Hurdle.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So first of all of the ones that are listed in the clause are currently already designated, approved, and within the urban boundary city-owned lands. So what could technically happen is that we have a number of other properties within the urban boundary already designated. So we're not talking about expanding the urban boundary here. We're talking about within the existing boundary. We have a number of other properties within the city that are designated employment industrial. So if the city decided in, I don't know, 2 years, 3 years from now to acquire some of those lands, those would have the opportunity or the ability to be developed because they're already in the urban boundary, they're already designated, and they're already serviced to a certain extent. So an example where we would be a partner, I think, is listed and in another recommendation in the report, which makes reference to Innovation Park. We are not the owner, but we would definitely be a partner and work with Queens to continue that work. So those lands are all within the urban boundary, and they're lands that we would be involved with to help support employment land growth.
Okay, thank you. So I'm struggling with the purpose of this clause. Is there any new direction from council to staff as the result of this clause?
Thank you.
Yep, CEO Hurdle.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So there isn't a specific direction, but I think based on some of the concerns that have been raised through various employment land applications that have been brought forward at council, we wanted to make sure that council was still interested in moving in that direction, because we've had situations where we've brought forward application for employment purpose, and there have been concerns expressed about utilizing the land for employment purpose. So we wanted to make sure that council is still in agreement with moving in that direction with the existing business parks.
Okay, I hear what you're saying, but the wording of the clause doesn't say existing business parks. It says business parks including, which in itself is essentially a non-binding statement. Because it can, as you said in your previous answer, it can include other things, including something in a different clause. I don't understand why you need council to endorse this particular clause. If we voted yay or nay, what would be the difference?
CEO Hurdle.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So we do, one of them is actually not a developed business park yet, which is Clogs Road. It's land that the city currently owns, but it's still going through the planning process. So, which is why the existing is not listed there, because it is currently not officially a developed business park. So if council wanted to go in a different direction with the properties, we would obviously have to look at a process to de-designate some of those lands and move into a different direction. I think what we want to make sure is that when we do bring applications related to employment development, that there is a overall council support that this type of development will take place within employment lands. Because we have at times received, I think, some conflicting messages. So we want to make sure that we have a clear direction from council.
Okay, I think we need to make that explicit. What the CEO just said, that needs to be made explicit in this clause so that council's direction is clear. So Clogs Road Business Park is not existing. Rockaway State Business Park, St. Lawrence Business Park, airport employment lands are existing. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. That Clogs Road is not yet a developed business park.
So we're reconfirming our commitment to the 3 existing employment lands, and we're reconfirming commitment to develop the Clogs Road Business Park. Is that accurate?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is correct, as Clogs Road is still undergoing planning process.
Question to the clerk, I guess. If we do not alter the wording to make that explicit, is it possible that this direction, that the vagueness of this particular clause could be misinterpreted by staff?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would suggest we take a quick recess, and if council is of the opinion that they want to go down that road, we'll provide that motion to put up on the screen so that everybody can see what we're actually could be voting on. So let's take I would ask the mayor to take a quick recess on this, and then we will come right back.
Okay, we'll take a 10-minute recess and return at 8:39.
Bullshit. Total bullshit. Okay, so anyway, you're getting the steaks.
Okay, folks. So I'm just going to reconvene. Councillor Stroud, are you? Councillor Stroud, are you there? Okay. So Councillor Stroud, you still have the floor, but staff have offered a proposed rewording of that second clause that with the consent of council that we could adopt. So I'm just going to ask if the clerks can put that up on the screen. So the clause 2 would read that council reconfirms its commitment to continue to prioritize the development of employment land to support job growth through the ongoing development of existing city business parks and future city business parks as described in report 20-220. So basically referring directly to the report. Can I get a?
Okay, so yes.
So I guess the first thing I'm going to ask Councillor Stroud is I'm going to ask for a consent of council to simply substitute this wording in for the second clause, and then we can debate and discuss that. So can I just see kind of a nod of heads? This consent of council. Okay. Okay. So that is now the second clause. Councillor Stroud, you have the floor and can speak to it.
Yes. So that rewording does make it clear because the report itself is public record, and it is what's listed in the report is anyone can see that, and there's no surprises. Nothing is, and that's not in the report is not subject to this clause. So that is a better wording. So thank you for that, Mr. Clerk. So then the matter is really the only remaining thing on my mind on this clause is how time sensitive this is. So we've already heard that it needs to be, if we want it to be continue to be the case or to be reaffirmed, we need to tell staff before the next official plan update work begins. So that makes it time sensitive in that sense. So I guess my question to staff is there any other time sensitive nature to this clause other than the official plan update?
CEO Hurdle.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Stroud. Yes, there are. Well, there is another element to this, which is the integrated economic development strategy. So part of the work that the team is doing is looking at the lands that are currently available for economic growth within the city, and also looking at future lands that may be available for economic growth to help really position the recommendations. So the availability and the commitment to that land is something that they are taking into consideration as part of the integrated economic development strategy, because that's what the employment land's primary purpose is to bring employment and create jobs.
Oh, I understand the importance to the integrated economic development plan. I just don't understand the time sensitive nature of the cause to the integrated economic development plan.
CEO Hurdle.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So council may recall, as I indicated, that at the last meeting of council, there was a report, an information report on the agenda that provided an update on the integrated economic development strategy. And the timelines that council have established through previous meetings of council is that this particular strategy will be completed before the end of this year, which means we have been working on it, but in order to be able to complete this strategy, we do need to make sure that we have that information that is confirmed by council. And as you are aware, we are at the end of October. That leaves us essentially with 2 months to finalize a strategy and report back to council, which is really not that much time.
Okay, so just walking through the logic here, without this clause, the integrated economic development strategy, which needs to be finalized by December of this year, has a question mark. Without this clause, there's sections of that work cannot be, or don't have reaffirmation from council. But without this clause, there's the original direction of council that's in the strategic plan and all the designated lands that already exist. So I guess, again, I come back to the point that what is new and what is preventing the integrated economic development plan from proceeding without this clause passing. I'm still not clear on that. You know, I'm not clear at what new direction from council this clause provides.
CEO Hurdle.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So the integrated economic development strategy can be completed based on the assumption that council will still want to support its employment lands the same way. And I would assume then that council would not be surprised when it receives a document at the end of the year or before the end of the year with those assumptions built in. And ideally, we wouldn't deviate from these assumptions and have to restart this work, which is why we're trying to get this reconfirmation from council. You will recall, Councillor Strout, that earlier I indicated that we've had different occasions where council or councillors have raised concerns about employment applications for employment land purpose. So we need to make sure council is comfortable with the development of employment land for employment purpose. If that's not where council wants to go, we shouldn't make these assumptions in our current integrated economic development strategy, then bring that to council and have council say, well, that's not really where we want it to go. So I think it's kind of important to make sure that council is on the same page and that we can include the appropriate or accurate information in the integrated economic development strategy.
Councillor Stroud, you have 30 seconds left on the clock for the discussion on clause 2.
Okay. So that last answer made me think, okay, so this is like the economic development strategy might go in the wrong direction without explicit reaffirmation from council on these points. But to me, it could also be interpreted as saying yes to something we've already said yes to and saying no to something that we haven't been asked. So that's something that might have been part of the conversations at economic development that we're not privy to here tonight. It's just that maybe the reason it's so confusing, I'm not sure if it's confusing because of the subject matter or because of the way that the recommendation reads, but I'm not sure what to do.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Stroud. Next on my list is Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. But you know what, I had my hand up earlier when we were discussing all of the motions together. I actually would like to speak. Maybe I could be the first one to speak to the third clause.
Absolutely, I will put you down for the speakers list for the third clause. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak to the second clause? Councillor Chappelle and then Councillor Osanek.
Thank you, through your chair. Actually, I'm very uncomfortable the way this new clause is because I raised the concern tonight about wanting to remove a piece of land and lot 452. And what this motion, by supporting this, will do will prevent an opportunity to bring that land piece forward. And that is something that is of concern to me because what you're doing is tying my hands in order to bring forward a motion in the future to remove that portion, small little 3-acre parcel of land. And you'll use this as, well, council gave you the direction to go in this direction. So I'd really like to understand. So my question is,
Chappelle, I'm just gonna pause there. That would not be my interpretation of this. So this clause speaks to reaffirm the business park, but not all of everything in detail that's connected to it. That's my interpretation. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask staff whether or not that is correct. If staff are going to interpret it a different way, then we'll address the issue because I know what your concern is. So I'm going to ask CEO Hurdle. CEO Hurdle, by passing, if council was to approve clause 2, would that prevent a future motion or direction from council to remove a particular parcel within a business park?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So some of my colleagues may want to jump in here as well, but a couple of things. So it never prevents council from removing anything they want to remove. Ultimately, council has the ability to do that through a motion and direction, and then for us to initiate a de-designation of land. But I think the point that I've been trying to make for maybe the last half an hour around council having different ideas of what they would like to see in employment parks or business parks is exactly what Councillor Chappelle raised. Some councillors may want to see, green landscape, or they may want to see, some parks in employment parks. So typically that's not the use of employment parks or business parks. But this is where, from a staff perspective, we sometimes get confused because we have some councillors that tell us, yes, we need business growth, we need to use this for business growth. And then we have some councillors that are obviously expressing a desire to maybe change the designation to have those parcels of land turn into maybe parks. So it's kind of important when we're trying to implement council's direction to actually know what council's direction as a council is. And this one has been a challenging one.
So through your worship, this is exactly the point of the premise of my comment. And so I don't feel comfortable supporting this motion because you're tying the hands of council. And if, with regards to the future plans, I don't feel reassured that this particular parcel can be removed based on the comments that were made. And I'd very much like to have an example that was alluded to on multiple occasions by Ms. Hurdle as how we've gone against our plan for growth, because I don't recall an incident other than this particular issue that we've looked at removing employment lands.
So a couple things. So first of all, I'm going to ask staff if council wanted to remove an individual parcel of land from one business park, does it need to be done in an amendment to this particular direction, or is it something that can come separate? CEO Hurdle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So it's not something that would need to be part of this direction. It's something that could come separate, and it would have to follow a planning process anyways, just like when we change any land use, we expect property owners obviously to follow a planning process. The city would have to do the same thing. So council could move a motion to direct us to do that, and we would initiate the planning process related to the change of land designation.
I have a question for the clerk then. Would we need a motion of reconsideration for lot 452 if this was to pass?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the motion for reconsideration would be the appropriate method to be able to have that property deleted from this particular recommendation. The reality is that members of council can always bring forward changes to this, but if the property is tied into any of the business parks that we're talking about, it would be a reconsideration to do that. Yes.
Hold on. We've got a whole bunch of people that have procedural questions, and I am first in line. Okay. So, am I correct that based on that, Mr. Clerk, what you're telling me is that if we pass clause 2, then removing a particular parcel of land from a business park would require a motion of reconsideration?
That's my interpretation, correct.
Okay. Points of order. Councillor Neal.
Yes. Thank you. I can't quite get my head around the idea that this is some kind of an omnibus recommendation that cannot be amended. All reports that come to us with recommendations in my time on council, which is probably too long, but my time on council has always allowed amendments to the recommendation.
So,
And-
Councillor Neal, I'm gonna stop you there because you've noted your point of order and actually agree with what you're saying. So I'm just gonna pause. So what we've done just before we start to debate it, just a procedural element, what we've been able to clarify now is that my original interpretation was incorrect. So I'm just going to clarify based on what the clerk has told us. If there are amendments that council or changes that council wishes to make to these business parks, now is the time to make them. Otherwise, a motion of reconsideration will be required later. So a motion to amend is absolutely in order. Just wanted to clarify that first.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
So points of order first. Are there any points of order? Okay. So we'll move then. So Councillor Chappelle, you still have the floor. If there's anything you would like to say on this?
Well, I'd like to, since this is going to hold council to that type of restriction, I would like to move that particular lot in the Cataraqui Woods subdivision be removed from consideration, so that another motion can be brought forward to the next council meeting to change the designation of that specific wood lot that for the change of the change into a parkland of some sort in that area to feed into the sensitive wetlands and property next to it.
So now I'm gonna have to call another recess because the wording of what we're gonna do here is key. So I understand the intent, but I'm gonna recess to understand exactly how we're gonna handle this. Councillor Sani, did you have a point of order?
Maybe like a point of clarification. Like, couldn't we just say with the exception of lot 452 from the Cataraqui Business Park to be discussed at a later time, which will be our November 17th meeting? So you can discuss that when we go into recess.
That's a really good suggestion. Just give me one. Okay, that actually is a great suggestion. So what we'll do is we'll look to just finesse that wording. So Councillor Chappelle, you have the floor. If the wording that Councillor Sanik has proposed is agreeable to you, you can propose that amendment.
I think it's most certainly agreeable. Thank you. I would propose that amendment.
Okay, so let's just pause for a minute. The clerk is going to put it up on the screen. Okay. So we'd be looking at an amendment to clause 2 to have it read that council confirms its commitment to continue to prioritize the development of employment lands to support job growth through the ongoing development of existing city business parks and future city business parks as described in report 20-220, with the exception, so this would be the amendment moved by Councillor Chappelle. I believe it was seconded by Councillor Osanek to add the following words to the end of clause 2, with the exception of lot 452 in the Cataract Way Estates Business Park, which may be considered at a future meeting of council. Okay. Point of order, Councillor Kylie.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. So just to be encouraged, by passing this, this means nothing on all those other sites could ever be considered by council without a motion to reconsideration. That I just don't think that's within the power of a single motion at council. That doesn't seem like a possibility, is it?
Well, the clerk has been clear that in that case, that is his interpretation. CO Hurdle.
Thank you, and through Mr. Mayor. So I would clarify that when we talk about the future business park, we haven't yet done the planning work for those. So the planning work would allow obviously councillors to make changes or amendments if they would like to, because all of those are going to have to come back to council. And that would be obviously an appropriate time to do that. So yes, for the future business parks, I think that there would definitely be some opportunities to make some amendments.
Point of order, Councillor Hutchison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With all due respect to the city clerk, I think this leads us into a cul-de-sac we don't want to go into. I'm thinking that what the motion says is we're going to prioritize job growth. That's a process. I think this is one way to think about it. The business parks are structures, and you have to bring amendments to change them. You have to have a bylaw amendments and planning documents to set them up. Are we saying the staff can't bring them within 6 months unless they can get 9 votes?
So your point of order, Councillor Hutchison, is well taken. What we have now is we have 2 very different opinions from staff, and so I'm going to call another recess because we need to understand this is a critical question. I do agree with the points of order that have been raised. We need to understand where it is here. Yep, Councillor Hutchison.
Okay, I just want to point out we can go with this amendment. Okay, we can get where everybody wants to go, I think, or most people want to go. But we do need in the background to clean up the process.
I agree.
Maybe not tonight, but
council needs some clarity. Council does need some clarity on exactly what the implication of clause 2 is. So I'm going to call another 5-minute recess. We'll convene at 9:12.
Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, folks, thank you for your patience. It's 9:13. We will reconvene. Okay. So I've conferred with staff, and this is my ruling on the procedural question in front of us. So my ruling is that there is a distinction between affirming a business park as a whole versus affirming all of the details of every single lot and property within that business park. So for example, if you don't want Hogs Road Business Park to go forward, right, then that would be the time to amend and to put that forward. If you have particular questions on particular parcels, my ruling is it would not be a motion of reconsideration to bring that forward. Now, that being said, I know we have an amendment that's before us. I'm not going to rule it out of order. If the mover and the seconder want to proceed with the amendment, I'm okay with that. But to be clear, my ruling is it will not be a motion of reconsideration to bring forward a change to a single lot within an overall business plan. Okay. So based on that ruling, we do have a motion to amend moved by Councillor Chappell, seconded by Councillor Osanik, to add in that additional wording about the exception of lot 452, which may come forward at a future motion of council. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Councillor Stroud, on the amendment.
Thank you, Worship. I will be brief. It's reassuring that the remainder that are not specified in the amendment as in the point of order by Councillor Kiley can actually be brought forward without reconsideration, as you just said. But also, I think that we do, the motivation behind the amendment is that we may have consensus tonight with council to exclude this particular piece right now. So we might as well make that explicit if that's the case, and therefore I will be supporting the amendment, and I thank the mover in the second.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other discussion on the amendment only? Okay, so we will call the vote on the amendment. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, on the motion, or rather on the paragraph as amended, is there any further discussion on paragraph 2? Okay, seeing none, we will call the vote then on paragraph 2 as amended. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, on to paragraph number 3. Any discussion? Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship. There's an uneasiness with this recommendation as it's written here in front of us, because what we're being asked to prioritize an official plan amendment to expand an urban boundary without any studies. This is CAO Hurdle did mention there will be a staff report coming before council, but we are, the way this is phrased, we are actually tonight supporting an expansion without that report. And we heard a lot of questions from various councillors, and a motion has been prepared and sent to the clerks. I wonder if the clerk could share with staff, because I feel, and other councillors, and this is seconded by Councillor Kiley, this would give us the report first before we can actually support an expansion of the urban boundary. And this report is asking for the removal of the clause that we have in front of us and substituted for a clause that asks for staff to research and report to council by Q2 2021 on the current and potential future employment lands within the city of Kingston that could be developed in keeping with the provincial planning statement and other related city planning policies and strategic priorities. Like, it's information that we kind of need in the absence of a full comprehensive review.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So we have then a motion to amend to, again, delete paragraph 3 and replace it with what was up on the screen. Moved by Councillor Doherty, second by Councillor Kiley. Discussion on the motion to amend. Councillor Oosterhoff.
Right. Can you hear me now? Yeah. I just don't understand why we need an amendment on this clause. This is something that staff has come to us and said we need to do. We've known about it for a while. When we have a shortage of lands available, we have it's almost a no-brainer expansion. It's something that we should be happy we're doing, that we are in the business, and I think every delay that we add to it just keeps us on that map of not ready for business, and that's alarming to me. And I don't know where it comes from. I don't know why we don't want employment lands, why we seem to question tax base and job opportunities and availability, and we just keep crippling the effort. And so I'm just hoping that we can see this better tonight. And staff is doing their job. It's only 60 acres. I wish it was 10 times that. And then we'd really be in business, because we're not. We're kidding around if we delay this tonight. We're really just a minor league city then.
Next is Councillor Bone. Councillor Bone.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. Can everybody hear me okay tonight? I guess there were some issues earlier. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to just follow up what Councillor Oosterhoff was mentioning on that. And part of the thing is I can go back now almost about 6 years, and I was speaking with staff about potential there, because take into account the fact that the third crossing will be completed within a couple of years, and that business park, I drive by it every day, it is filling up hugely. Is it filling? Like, we're going to be out of land soon. And in talking with staff, I began to realize that it takes 3 to 5 years just to prepare some of these, to even submit an application and to get the background data. So this isn't saying that we approve this tonight and all of a sudden tomorrow it's done. Like, this takes a lot of work, and this is basically just to even begin that preparatory work for an area of the city where we're basically running out of that employment. Part of the other concern I have with, I guess, the amendment is, and this may go a little bit off track, but it's the current zoning of some of the things there actually restricts some of the businesses that want to go in. So it's more complicated to fix that than it is to add some land and zone the new land properly. So there's some missed opportunities. I could go on all night about probably 5 or 6 different businesses that just could not go in the existing park because of the zoning that currently exists. So we're missing out every day on opportunities there. Whereas my hope is that this expansion in 3 to 5 years would be able to come in and capitalize on those missed opportunities before they're gone forever. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, will you take the chair?
I will, Mayor Patterson, and I recognize you.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask staff a question. So we've discussed a lot about the process that's involved with paragraph 3 that staff have put forward about what that would look like and the timing involved. And I see the amendment that's been put forward as proposing a different process. And I want to make sure I understand the difference and also understanding implications with respect to timing. So I'm going to ask staff if they can speak to timing and any implications of the amendment versus the original process that staff have put forward.
So through you, Deputy Mayor, if I may, in answer to your question, Mayor Patterson, I think that there will be overlapping work because what we have to do, and perhaps Ms. Gummo could also speak to this, but in order to look at the studies of what we would need to do for the boundary expansion, we do need to look at the current supply, what land is available for employment uses as it's related to the provincial policy statement. So I think there is definitely some overlapping messaging here in the new recommendation compared to the one staff put forward. I think the timing is I would think staff we would ask for a bit longer time if this motion were to go forward. I think something like the end of Q3 would provide more opportunity to do the research in light of all other priorities and work that's been happening. Sometime in Q2 21 seems too fast of a timeline for me to assess. Just trying to put it together tonight, what would need to happen in putting an inventory of land together, look at policies. I wouldn't want to rush that and also have to put aside other things. So
okay, thank you. So I think my follow-up question is to understand then, and Commissioner Higginbotham, you've talked about overlap. So I'm trying to understand the distinction, because we've heard clearly that the staff recommendation is not deciding to go ahead and expand the urban boundary, that there will be a future decision point on that, and that before that decision point, there would need to be studies and looking at employment land and building that justification and talking about all those things. So how, so in staff's interpretation, how is the amendment different from the staff recommendation that was before us?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, or Mr. Deputy Mayor, perhaps one of my colleagues could jump in. I am not a city planner, but I would think that in my recollection of the work that was done to prepare the case last time, as CAO Hurdle has discussed for these lands at the direction of council to include it in the previous OP update, there needs to be a look at the supply of current land, of how this would meet the provincial policy statement, what are what lands we have available, what is the market looking for. All these factors will play into the case to determine whether the boundary can be expanded at St. Lawrence Business Park. So it has to be a comprehensive look at supply of employment lands. So that is why my understanding is there is overlapping work. I'm hoping I'm answering your question, and perhaps Ms. Gummo can help me out, because I am an engineer by trade, not a planner.
Deputy Mayor, I do see that CAO Hurdle's also put her hand up.
Right. Yes, Deputy Mayor. Oh, I see everybody in the screen now. Good. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. So the study that we would have to undertake would be the same. So when we updated our studies the last time, I personally was quite engaged. I was a new commissioner of planning at the time. So the study would have to be the same, and I think Commissioner Hugenboss described what would be included in that study. So the new wording doesn't change essentially the study that we will have to undertake. I think what we're flagging is the timing, and I think Commissioner Hugenboss indicated that the end of Q3 2021 would be more preferable, because we will need some assistance to go through the entire process like we did about 5 years ago.
Okay. So that helps. It seems like it's a similar process if the mover and seconder are agreeable to change the timeline. So the only thing when I'm looking at the two different options that are before us is that the staff recommendation is to prioritize the expansion of the St. Lawrence Business Park. And my impression is that the alternative that's been put forward is to leave the door open to prioritize a different business park, or maybe a different area as well. So I guess that would be my question to staff is there likely that there would be, is there another expansion somewhere else of the urban boundary, or expansion of another existing business park that might be another candidate?
So through you, Deputy Mayor, thanks for the question, Mayor Patterson. I'm not aware of any other potential business park that could be expanded that is currently outside of the urban boundary and could be added to the urban boundary to add to the amount of employment land that could be available. I think this is the only area that I am aware of that is currently connected or adjacent to an existing business park and could be easily expanded on, but is currently outside the urban boundary. I'm not aware of any other parcels of land that could be added to the urban boundary easily and be able to be integrated into a business park.
Thank you. So here's, I think what I would say is that I appreciate where I think Councillor Doherty and Councillor Kiley are coming from, is just wanting to make sure we get as much information as possible before we make those decisions. But I think based on that answer from staff, I would tend to agree. So staff have been very clear that we're talking about where we would expand if we need additional employment land. So it seems to me pretty clearly, if we need additional employment land, this is the spot. This is where it would have to go. There is no other candidate that's there. Obviously, we're going to do all the studies, we're going to do all the work that's required towards that official plan, but I'm comfortable saying that. It makes sense. It's land we own. It's right next to, adjacent to a business park, and I don't see any other candidate. If staff had come forward and said, well, maybe we could look at this possibility instead, then I would tend to agree. But I think based on that, I'm comfortable with the original staff recommendation. If council does choose to amend this, again, I'll just ask for the consideration to change the timing. Thank you.
I return the chair to you, Mayor Patterson.
Next on my list, point of order, Councillor Neal.
Just very quickly, could we have the amendment back up on the screen? We've done a lot of talking about it and it's been a long night. So thank you.
Yes. So here's the amendment. So essentially to replace the existing paragraph 3 and replace it with a new paragraph 3 that would read that city staff research and report to council by Q2 2021 on the current and potential future employment lands within the city of Kingston that could be developed in keeping with the provincial planning statement and other related city planning policies and strategic priorities.
Okay.
So
thank you very much.
Just consulting my speakers list. So on the motion to amend, next on my list is Councillor Neal and then Councillor Hutchison.
Thank you very much. I've almost gone for a record here. That was 2 points of order that I've had to, and I almost had a third because the initial speaker, I think, was questioning the intent of the mover of this motion originally. I think it's really important that we recognize that all of our colleagues have every right to bring forward recommendations. We've been told that this is a very long-term, and it'll be some time before it becomes actionable. Probably it will be the next council that puts the finishing touches on this. So what's being requested with this amendment, I think, is just a simple request for additional information. And hearing from staff that with the tweaking of it from Q2 to Q3 would make it achievable, I think the mover and seconder of this motion are just doing their job and requesting additional information that this council and the next council will be able to use as information. So I'll be supporting the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I have Councillor Hutchison, and I have Councillor Holland, then I have Councillor Hill, then I have Councillor Kiley. Okay, so next is Councillor Hutchison on the motion to amend.
Okay, this speaks to timing. I think Councillor Bone makes some good points about the possibility of development in the St. Lawrence Business Park. But I think he's mistaken if he thinks that all of council knew the points that he made. And then that's not in the report. And he has addressed these issues of businesses. I know businesses that want to move across the river once the bridge is in there, at least one or two. And now that I think of it, okay? But I don't think council's been thinking about this in that way. So I just use that as an introduction to the question of timing, which Councillor Neal and a couple of others have already been. One other way of getting at this issue is that what is the difference in timing between prioritizing the St. Lawrence Business Park expansion now and consideration of expansion of the St. Lawrence Business Park through the OP review? The OP review has got to be done like next year. We might be able to buy some extra time with the ministry and the provincial government, but I don't know what we're arguing about here. It's like 2 or 3 months. I mean, I'm just not sure. So I'm asking staff, what's the difference in the amount of time it'll take to prioritize it now? Yes, it would be nice to put it in the integrated economic strategy, but you know, it could be in there, as was suggested by the CAO. I believe she was suggesting it could appear as something we're proposing that we are looking at.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So I don't think with the change of wording that's being proposed by the two councillors, there's not really a significant difference. I think you pointed out, you know, that the process would be similar, and Commissioner Hugenboss commented on that as well. So the timing would not be that different. And I think from a staff perspective, we indicated that we didn't necessarily have concerns with the proposed change in the language as it relates to the motion being brought forward by Councillor Dorothy and Councillor Kiley.
Thank you. So again, I think Councillor Bone made some important points that probably weren't a bit obvious to any number of councillors. However, if the real question here, I think, is people are saying, well, you're asking us to go beyond the urban boundary, the urban growth boundary, but we don't know entirely why that's needed or is necessary. We got some idea, better than we did 10 minutes ago, but I don't see any problem in voting for this if as the CAO says, it basically takes the same amount of time. So I'll vote for that, as long as people remember we're not losing anything here. This is a 3 to 5 year process, as Councillor Neal was basically pointing out. It doesn't matter how you cut and dice it. It's just what's going to be the case. So that's all I've got to say.
Okay, thank you. Next is Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry for the confusion, but I not necessarily put it back up on the screen, but is there actually timing that's indicated now did we agree, did the mover and seconder agree to adjust the timing? Okay. All right. So I have another question for staff, I guess related to process. I'm mostly curious in terms of the workload of staff, given that they've requested extra time for this amendment. Is there anything in this work that would limit their ability to work in the planning department on the comprehensive zoning bylaw changes?
So, Mr. Mayor,
go ahead.
Sorry, I can't turn my video on, but it's Commissioner Huguemas here. Thank you, Councillor Holland. There we go. Thanks, James. So, with the this work will be supported by planning staff, but this will be work led by business, real estate, and environment department staffing. We have identified some budget if any is required in order to do some of the work, and I agree that it is a process, and we need to target the studies that are necessary. So it will not take planning staff's time away from their other work. Don't want to speak for them, but it will be led by teams through real estate and then development.
Okay, thank you. So, I mean, I'm not overly, I fully understand and appreciate the desire and the logical location of this parcel and why it would be something to look at. Obviously, the idea and the phrasing around expanding the urban boundary is something that is causing concern for a number of people, not just members of council, but members of the public. So for that reason, I'll support the amendment in order to gain the extra information that would be required to support this this change. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Councillor Kiley.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson, through you. I think Councillor Holland just summed it up, and I'll be brief because we've been talking long. I think there also might be a division between still new councillors, myself, Councillor Doherty, Hill, and Chappelle, and previous councillors, because lots of information referenced in this discussion is very important, of course, Councillor Oosterhoff, Councillor Bowen, but we just simply haven't seen it. And that's why Councillor Doherty and I have asked for this additional information before we make that final decision. So we don't want to put the cart before the horse. We want to get those details. We want to look at it in a fulsome way. This will allow us to do it and make that decision when the time comes. So I support the motion.
Okay, thank you. So just, so we're going to, with the consent of council as a friendly amendment, we've just changed the date and time. Can I, Ms. Kirk, can we just have that up on the screen one last time so we can see that? Okay, so now it reads that city staff research and report to council by the end of Q3 2021 on the current and potential future employment lands within the city of Kingston that could be developed in keeping with the provincial planning statement and other related city planning policies and strategic priorities. Okay. If I can just go back here. Okay. So Councillor Doherty, you do have the last word. I just wanted to make sure that you're both comfortable with the timing, both the mover and the seconder. Okay, Councillor Doherty, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'll also keep this brief. I just that there was a suggestion earlier on that that this motion is saying that we're not supporting employment land. And I just like to make it clear that we totally and absolutely support employment land. We understand the importance of this, of employment land. The intent of this is to simply give us more information so that we can make an informed decision. That's what this is about. And we heard from staff tonight that they have no concerns whatsoever regarding timing. So I hope you can support it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So with that, we will call the vote then on the motion to amend to replace the existing paragraph 3 with the new paragraph 3. We'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Okay, so on, okay, so now we have voted to replace paragraph 3. So now we will call the vote on paragraph 3. We've essentially already had that discussion. Unless there's any further debate or discussion, we'll call the vote on the new paragraph 3. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, paragraph 4, any discussion? Okay, we will call the vote on paragraph 4. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. We'll wait for Councillor Bohm to come back. And now we'll do a vote on paragraph 5. Any discussion? Councillor Chappelle?